We say fight back!
For our book club today, we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments. and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglass was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight. Hey, over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's there's just it's there. It's there for you. And it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff. And you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. Got a lot coming up in the 3 hours of our program today. Eric Caron will be with us in just a moment, former U.S. Special Agent. We're going to talk about Trump loyalists and terrorists. We're going to be discussing Congressman Steve King, who for years was a regular guest on this program. Is the Midwest flooding an act of God or an act of Koch Industries and ExxonMobil? And billionaires get the profits and average Americans get screwed once again. Pretty amazing stuff. We'll touch on all these things in the other news of the day. But let me start out with Eric Caron. He's a former U.S. Special Agent and diplomat, the author of a new book, Switched On, The Heart and Mind of a Special Agent. His website, switchedonlife.com. Eric, welcome to the program.
Hey, Tom, it's a privilege to be on your show. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I have a quote from you that it's astonishing that after 9/11, the Democrat Party, I'm not sure what you're talking about there, there's no such thing as a Democrat Party, is failing to see the gravity of an open border. They won't recognize the importance of border security even as MS-13 members pour into America. Just saw a 16-year-old boy being killed by MS-13 members. You realize MS-13 started as a Los Angeles street gang?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I don't get here, well, lay out your case.
Well, my case is simple, that this president recognizes the threat. He sees the threat matrix from transnational crime groups, i.e. MS-13 and the cartels operating in Mexico. And he sees the threat from state sponsors of terror, such as Iran, North Korea, Sudan, Syria. and what they're planning to do against us. And he sees the threat from the terrorist organizations as well that are internationally and as well as operating here in America. So he understands that without border security, we're doomed to repeat ourselves based on what happened on 9/11. And it's simple.
So you're suggesting that the 9/11 hijackers came across the southern border to get into this country?
No, they came across the northern border.
They flew in here on legal visas, every single one of them.
Yeah, and they overstayed their visas.
Right, but they all came through airports. What, you know, how is building a wall on the southern border going to stop a 9/11? What terrorist who is serious terrorist, you know, somebody who's serious, who has you know, resources, intelligence, I mean, as in competence, you know, can think clearly and has some cash, as these guys did. What person like that is gonna crawl on his hands and knees across 100 miles of desert on the southern border when he can get on a damn airplane and buy a first-class ticket out of Saudi Arabia? By the way, speaking of state sponsors of terrorism, as you well know, Saudi Arabia's Wahhabism is the inspiration of ISIS, and Donald Trump is sucking up to its murderous dictator. You know, because his son-in-law wants to borrow another $1 billion from them. But what terrorist in his right mind is going to crawl across the southern border when they can just fly into the United States on a first-class ticket?
Well, Tom, we do know that terror organizations are operating in Central and South America. We do know that they've across the
absolutely, Eric. So, you know, you know, and you know who put them there? It was Ronald Reagan back in the 1980s. The Contras, he was feeding all kinds of money to the right-wing death squads. Elliot Abrams was feeding this stuff. Yeah, I mean, damn. I mean, you know, George Herbert Walker Bush almost went to jail for this if Bill Barr had not recommended that he pardon Abrams and Ollie North and Casper Weinberger and all those guys, because they were the ones who were preparing to testify against him. It was a huge scandal. Yeah, I mean, it was front page of the New York Times all the way across the headlines on Christmas Day of 1992. Sure, there's right-wing terrorists down there all over the place. That's why all these people are showing up on our southern border. They're fleeing that terror.
Yeah, and I think we also have to understand, Tom, the nexus between terror groups and the transnational crime groups. They're in some cases, not all, but in some cases, they are in fact working hand in glove and supporting one another.
Of course.
So let's not forget that.
Of course, but what does that have to do with why we need a wall on our southern border to stop terrorists who can get on a plane and fly, you know, Saudi Arabian Airlines or whatever the name of their carrier is?
Yeah. Well, I think we need to harden up all our ports of entry, not just our land borders, but our seaports as well.
So how do you do that? You've got something like 5 million people, I believe, a month coming into the United States from foreign countries. It's been a long time since I've seen the numbers, but it's millions of people a month. They're coming into the United States on tourist visas, on business visas, on student visas, on work visas. Hell, Donald Trump is hiring them. He just applied for 20-some-odd new visas for his hotel or his golf course in New Jersey because they busted him for having you know, illegal aliens working there for the last 18 years. I mean, he doesn't want to hire Americans. He wants to hire foreigners, and they come over here. How do you know that they're not terrorists? And what does that have to do with building a wall? Well, we need to vet people who get on airplanes. We already do that. And we need to do a better job at that. We need to screen containers that come into America for WMD agents. Well, what does that have to do with the wall? Well, because it's all part of a larger strategy to keep us safe, Tom. I mean, we cannot, because bad guys will go where it's soft. And so the president is listening to the men and women of law enforcement and saying, we need assets. You know, the bad guys in south of our border, Eric, excuse me, the bad guys south of our border are not sitting around thinking, gee, you know, I'm a robber and I'm a rapist. I think I'll go to the United States to do my robbery and rape. No, they'd much rather do robbery and rape in Mexico, where it's a lot easier to get away with. I mean, you know, or for that matter, go into Guatemala, in Honduras, or El Salvador, countries that Reagan and U.S. foreign policy ravaged, and where they not only can get away with it, but the government will openly support them. They're not trying to figure out how to get to the United States. Tom, what do you say to the mother just last week whose son at 15 years old was murdered by MS-13 in Virginia and Maryland? You know, slaughtered 100 times, stabbed. I would say that it's really a shame that Ronald Reagan was pumping crack cocaine into Los Angeles back in the 80s, leading to the beginning of the MS-13 gang.
Okay. If that's what you believe.
Well, it's documentable fact. I mean, come on, Eric. I mean, terrible things are going to happen. But, you know, for you and Fox News and groups like this to take, you know, like that woman in San Francisco, it turns out the guy dropped the gun on the ground and accidentally shot her. But, you know, the illegal immigrant who killed what's-her-name, who turned into like this iconic character on Fox News. Everybody who watches Fox News can repeat her name. I'm sorry, I can't remember it. I'm sure you know it.
Yeah, I can't. No, I don't.
Okay. But you know what I'm talking about. I mean, you know, it's like you take the exception. We know that immigrants to the United States, illegal immigrants to the United States, and I'm no fan of illegal immigration. I think that we should start, you know, when Ronald Reagan in 1986 stopped prosecuting wealthy white employers for hiring people who are in this country without documentation. Prior to 86, we did not have a problem. Post 86, we've had a problem because he turned on this giant magnet. Now, we all know, looking back at the record and the documents that are available now, that Reagan did that in an attempt to destroy the unions, particularly in the construction and meatpacking industries. And he was successful. In less than a decade, those unions were basically those industries were basically de-unionized. And that was his goal. And he was successful, but no president since has started enforcing those laws. I think we should enforce those laws.
Yes. Tom, you get no arguments from me on worksite enforcement. I did it. It's in my book. I arrested 361 illegal aliens at a U.S. defense contractor in 2007.
Yeah, and you know, and like I said, the Trump organization keeps hiring these people. But what we know about that illegal immigrant population is that they actually commit fewer crimes than native-born Americans. And so you can pick one or two crimes and try to imply that these people are robbers, rapists, and murderers, and certainly there will be a few among them, just like there are a few among any population.
Yeah.
But you know, but to say that is like saying because Jeffrey Epstein is a billionaire and a pedophile, all billionaires are pedophiles. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, Tom, I hear what you're saying. And, you know, the stats regarding illegal immigration and the crime that they commit is kind of fuzzy, granted. But, you know, I've seen numbers 500 homicides, 1,000 homicides a year committed by illegal aliens. But you know what? At the end of the day, if that's your son or daughter killed one illegal alien who commits a murder against someone.
But they're not committing the murder because they're an illegal alien. They're committing the murder because they're a murderer. We need to stop murderers. I mean, you know, you've got murderers.
They're here illegally, Tom. They weren't allowed. They weren't supposed to be in our country. You have a front door in your home, right, Tom?
You know, once again, Eric, you're trying to suggest that people who come into this country illegally are doing so to commit crimes, and I'm not buying that. I mean, you know, maybe the crime of working.
Some of them are. Some of them are coming to America to work. I get it. I see it. But there are some, you have to admit, right, that there are many illegal aliens who come to America who commit
You're
crime.
talking about criminals. You deal with that through your criminal justice system. You're not going to. If somebody wants to, if somebody is a real, you know, Eric, think about this for a second. I mean, just logic here, right? I'll give you the last minute after because we're going to hit a hard break in a minute and a half. If somebody is a true, let's say, a serial killer, a genuine psychopath, bent on, you know, raping and murdering as many people as he possibly can, that's his goal. Yeah. And he's sitting around thinking, I think I'll go to the United States and commit these kinds of crimes. Why would he walk across 100 miles of desert when he could go to Tijuana and get a visa and drive across the border like literally 1 million people a day do in Tijuana?
You know, Tom, when people come to America illegally, they're committing not just immigration crimes, but
not the people who are coming through the desert, Eric. They're the desperate people. The stone cold killers are coming in on airplanes and by car.
No doubt. But these people are coming in and they're assuming the identity, in many cases, of U.S. citizens. They're purchasing false
to work
Social Security cards.
Sure.
They're getting licenses that are false. They're committing insurance fraud.
You know, we should stop all that stuff, Eric, and we should stop the magnet by putting white employers in jail. But
I agree. You got no arguments for me. I outlined that in my book, Switched On: The Heart and Mind of a Special Agent, when I arrested 361 illegal aliens at a U.S. defense contractor.
Okay. Eric Caron, a former U.S. Special Agent and diplomat, author of a new book, Switched On: The Heart and Mind of a Special Agent. SwitchedOnLife.com is the website for his book. Eric, thanks for dropping by today.
Hey, sir, thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Good speaking with you. We will be back. It's 18 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So do we really need a wall to be more afraid or more secure or more, what, more East German? And welcome back. Jesse in Miami. Hey, Jesse, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hey, hi, Tom. Wow, the conversation you just had, it just really is an extension of racism. You just say all black people are lazy, they don't want to work, they just want free stuff. You just focus on that, then you have people believing it. But
right, and his version of it is all these Mexicans, all these brown people, they're just stone cold killers and rapists.
They focus on the lie. We just got to focus on be the simple child. Why does this happen?
Yeah.
They don't have no answer to that. All they could do is respond, all right, I'm on my main subject, but how do people get to go with, magical thinking? Mm-hmm. We done lost the concept of thinking.
Yeah, that's really the issue here, because it really is magical thinking to think that somebody who is coming to somebody who is competent, a competent killer who wants to come to the United States and kill people, is going to cross 100 miles of god-awful desert in order to do it when they can just show up at the border.
And the thing is, why would they do it? And why would you just want to smear that one person versus a whole society? It's obvious they're trying to keep off the main subject of why the people come here, why people commit crime, so they just focus on the crime itself. The lady in New Zealand is talking about banning assault rifles.
Right.
Now, I don't want to get into that, but the real reason is, why does these mass shootings happen? It reminds me of the death squads in South America. They just terrorizing the population to keep them thinking, hey, what's the reason for this? Instead of just...
And by the way, and Jesse, apropos of your opening point, if you look at the photographs from the 80s of those death squads, that, it appears John Negroponte and people like Elliot Abrams were giving a little tip of the hat to. If you look at the photos of the death squads, and then you look at the photos of the people that they were killing, the death squads were mostly European ancestry people from El Salvador, and the people they were killing were mostly Native ancestry, Native American ancestry, indigenous people.
Yep.
And that was as much a racist war as anything, what Reagan was fighting in Central America.
Yep, I agree. But the thing is, how can we get people to stop thinking magically? And the only way is to go to the root of the problem. Because if you just go to the root of the problem, well, why do people do that? Then they're going to have to start thinking. But if you just go to knee-jerk reaction, they say, oh, well, that's the answer. Just like they hit the computer. They forget how to write or even how to count without the computer. I mean, we just losing the whole concept of think because we're not going to the roots.
Yeah.
You hear me on this?
Yeah, yeah. I think that, just this, your concept of magical thinking, is just, so spot on, Jesse. And this is the problem, is that these guys, and not speaking necessarily of our guest, but the people who are watching Fox News all day long and listening to Right Wing Hate Radio are falling into this fantasy world, and well-financed terrorists and truly competent murderers are going to spend weeks crossing a dangerous desert in which hundreds of people die every month or every year, in order to get to the United States to do their job when they can just fly into Los Angeles. Jesse, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's 22 and a half minutes past the hour. Jesse was just pointing out, not in the context of our guest, but in the broader context of this issue, the essentially inherent racism in the argument that the people we need to be afraid of are those people coming from south of the border. As I said, a serious criminal, a serious, a stone cold killer, somebody who definitely, is like a really competent drug dealer, they are not going to travel through a couple hundred miles of deadly desert where hundreds of people die every year to get to the United States. If they want to get to the United States, they will fly. They'll fly into Houston, they'll fly into Los Angeles, they'll fly into Chicago. I mean, there's flights every day into the United States from all over South and Central America. You can get here. And if you've got some sort of, terrible criminal record, it's not that hard to get a little phony ID and just drive in through the border. The people who are showing up at the quote, illegally at the border are people who are seeking refuge. There's people who are seeking asylum. They're desperately looking for an opportunity to flee from these death squads that Ronald Reagan installed in Central America in the 1980s. Ronald Reagan, Ollie North, Elliot Abrams, all these guys, John Negroponte, they installed and supported and subsidized these right-wing death squads. And by the way, now there's just came out this documentary about how Jair Bolsonaro, the new president of Brazil, climbed his way to the top on the back of right-wing militia death squads. I mean, as is happening in the Philippines right now with Trump's other good buddy, where he's got a Trump tower, Duterte. Or as is happening in Turkey right now with Trump's other good buddy, Mr. Erdogan, who told him, also where Trump has a Trump tower. And Erdogan calls him up and says, you need to pull out of Syria. Oh, yes, sir. Sir, yes, sir. This is just like craziness. This is like crazy magical thinking. It's just mind-boggling. And, and where do we go with this? How do we even respond to this? Ramon in San Francisco. Hey, Ramon, what's on your mind? Thanks for listening to 910 AM.
Oh, thank you, Tom, for the opportunity to address you. I was listening to Eric, and he doesn't know that in the 1980s, here in San Francisco, the police captured the Menezes brothers. They were Nicaraguan nationals working for the Contras. And believe it or not, they were released along with their load of cocaine so they can just go on.
Wait a minute, the Menendez brothers who murdered their parents?
Menezes brothers, yeah. They're the ones who were working for the Contras in San Francisco.
These are the two boys who famously murdered their parents?
No. Those are the
oh, that's another group. Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Menezes.
I see, okay. All right.
And eventually they flew to Nicaragua and they were captured by the Sandinistas. And I think they're still in jail in Nicaragua.
Yeah.
And my point is that if you want the people from Central America to stop coming into this country because they are desperate, of course, what they got to do is accept that we created a problem with Ronald Reagan. Let's invest money up there. They need water, Tom. They need housing. They don't have it. They live miserably. Right. That's one of the reasons why they come too. There's no food on the table.
That's right. And by the way, they're being whacked by global warming now, Ramon. You're seeing desertification happening across Central America.
Exactly. And we could do a lot. Instead of building that wall, why don't we go and put a couple of $1 billion in Central America, and I bet you people,
Amen.
They won't come here.
Amen. You're singing my song. I have been saying this for a long, long time. We broke those countries. It's our responsibility to rebuild them. Ramon, or at least provide the funds so that they can rebuild themselves.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Ramon, thank you for the call. We'll take your calls right after the break. It's 28 minutes past the hour, or thereabouts. For our book club today, we're reading from a book by Elizabeth Holtzman, one of the former U.S. Congresswomen who sat on the committee that considered impeaching Richard Nixon. And this book is titled The Case for Impeaching Trump. Just came out. This is from the first chapter titled Impeachment. When Donald Trump's presidential election victory was announced in the early morning hours of November 9, 2016, like many Americans, I rubbed my eyes in disbelief and dismay. Two questions raced through my mind. What had become of America that a man so unfit, so small-minded, so mean-spirited could be elected? A man whose ethnic and racial bigotry had set the stage for his presidential run when he called Mexicans rapists and made racist birther attacks on President Barack Obama, whose vulgarity and misogyny were laid bare in the Access Hollywood tape when he bragged about forcibly grabbing women by their genitals, whose performance at presidential debates showed him not only flagrantly ill-informed, but manifestly unwilling to get informed? My second question was about how much harm this man would do to America as its 45th president. I have my answer now to the latter, less than 2 years after the election. President Trump has damaged American democracy far more than I would have guessed. He has refused to protect our system of free elections from foreign interference. He has relentlessly attacked the administration of justice, in particular the investigation into a possible conspiracy with Russia regarding the 2016 presidential election, putting himself above the rule of law. He has failed to separate his personal business from the country's, flaunting the Constitution's requirements. And he has violated the constitutional rights of the people in separating children from parents at the southwest border without due process of law. And to cover up these misdeeds, he has systematically lied to and assailed the press. These are great and dangerous offenses that the framers of our Constitution wanted to counteract and thwart. They provided a powerful remedy: impeachment. Many tremble at the word, fearing how President Trump's supporters will react to an impeachment inquiry, worrying that it will only further polarize an already deeply divided nation, or that there will not be enough votes in the Senate to convict him if the House of Representatives votes to impeach. Just calling for an inquiry will be viewed as a Democratic Party attack on the head of another party, a kind of coup d'etat. It's easy to find reasons to be anxious, but I'm not afraid. As a junior Congresswoman, the youngest ever elected at that time, I served on the House Judiciary Committee that voted to impeach President Richard Nixon for the high crimes and misdemeanors he committed in connection with the Watergate cover-up and other matters. Through thorough, fair, and above all bipartisan, the committee acted on solid evidence presented in televised hearings that riveted the nation, handing us the blueprint for how impeachment can be successfully pursued today. In our 225 years of constitutional democracy, the Nixon impeachment process has been proven to be the only presidential effort that worked. Though Nixon resigned, the only president ever to do so, 2 weeks after the committee's impeachment vote, he did so to avoid the certainty of being impeached and removed from office. We became a better nation for having held the president accountable. All of which raises two further questions. Should we be considering the impeachment of President Donald J. Trump? Will we again become a better nation by pursuing that option? To answer, we need to set aside President Trump's unremitting attacks on the environment, on our close allies, on the Affordable Care Act, and any disagreements we have over policy, as well as any personal animus, and simply ascertain whether he is engaged in the kind of egregious conduct that would meet the constitutional standards for impeachment and removal from office. This means we have to focus sharply on his potentially impeachable offenses. In doing so, we will find it useful to compare them, when possible, to similar offenses by President Nixon, found to be impeachable by the House Judiciary Committee in 1974. Here's a list of some of President Trump's potentially impeachable offenses developed as of this writing. A possible interference with or obstruction of the administration of justice and an abuse of power. On May 9, 2017, Trump fired FBI Director James Comey, who is investigating both his national security advisor, Michael Flynn, and Russia's connections to the Trump campaign in connection with influencing the 2016 presidential election. 2 days later, President Trump admitted to NBC's Lester Holt that Comey's firing had to do with that, quote, Russia thing. In other words, President Trump acknowledged that he was trying to shut down the FBI investigation into his own possible conspiracy with Russia. Flynn has since pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. The Comey firing uncannily echoes Nixon's firing of the special Watergate prosecutor for seeking highly damaging information about that president, a brazen defiance of the rule of law that triggered the start of impeachment proceedings against Nixon. A second possible interference with or obstruction of the administration of justice and an abuse of power. President Trump has persistently and publicly attacked those heading the Russia investigation, including Special Counsel Robert S. Mueller III and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, and has repeatedly condemned Attorney General Jeff Sessions for recusing himself, suggesting that he wants to fire any and all of them in order to get control of the Russian investigation. He actually did give an order to fire Mueller. A failure to care that the laws are faithfully executed is required by the Constitution. To try to deflect public concern about his possible role, well, it continues from there. The case for impeaching Trump by Elizabeth Holtzman.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and amazing. Oliver in New York City, listening on WBAI. Hey, Oliver, what's up?
Yeah, good afternoon.
Hey.
Excuse me, I just want to make two quick points. One is that first person you spoke to, the
agent,
service agent. Yeah, he just exemplifies what the real issue is when all people of different beliefs try to converge, right?
Okay.
You can't change their thinking, no matter how wrong you believe they are, or in actuality that they are, just like they can't change your thinking. In other words, it's an exercise in futility.
I'm not sure that's true, Oliver. In fact, I had this, I'm not going to name the person, but there's a conservative who used to come on our program from time to time, and there have been a couple of issues that we have debated over the years. The one that most recently comes to mind, well, anyhow, a couple of issues that we've debated over the years. I don't want to get too detailed on this.
Okay.
And Sean reached out to him a couple days ago and said, hey, you want to come on and debate Tom about this? And he says, no, the last time we talked, Tom convinced me I was wrong and he was right on this issue. Now, he's still a conservative and he still has other issues with which he's willing to debate me. But, it's like in my own life, and on this program, frankly, I mean, people who have listened to this program for years will tell you all kinds of stories about people who call in and say, I was just scanning the channels on Sirius XM or Free Speech TV or, locally in a local radio station or whatever, and I heard your show, and I started listening, and I realized, oh, my God, I didn't know the other half of it. So, I'm not as cynical about this, Oliver, as it appears you are. I'm guessing that in your life you've changed people's minds.
Well, I'll tell you what really changes people's mind and what informs people: experience.
Yeah.
Experience is what informs all of us, whether it's right, correct what we believe from experiences, or wrong, or myths, or whatever. It's experience. So when you talk to a person over time, then they can change. But in just dealing with conversations, debates, or whatever, like between congressmen, one very conservative, one progressive, not going to change anything.
Well, the thing that doesn't change there, Oliver, is who's paying their bills, and as long as they're making their money from big chemical companies or fossil fuel companies or whatever, they're going to continue, or the big gun manufacturers, they're going to continue singing that song. That's they're just doing their job.
I understand that. So when they are disagreeing with the progressive, that's because they're lying. Those people you just spoke about give them money, etc.
Or are hypocrites, or just convenient.
There are people who don't believe, for example, that climate change is real, and you can't change their thinking. Over time, experience can inform them of their error of thinking.
Well, and I think that experience is happening right now in the Midwest with this bomb cyclone. You've got a lot of farmers who've been watching Fox News for a long time who are sitting there going, hey, wait a minute, I don't think so. Oliver, thanks for the call. Linwood in Gordonsville, Virginia. Hey, Linwood, what's up? Thanks for watching us on YouTube.
Well, thank you, Tom. You're welcome. I was sitting there listening to your discussions yesterday with the sheriff and today with this gentleman, and I kept saying to myself, Tom needs some tools on how to defeat these suspected white supremacists. So I'm going to help you on some things. When he used the term aliens, you should have asked him this question, or these questions. Is a white supremacist racist alienated from the victims of white supremacy, non-white people in the known universe? If so, alienated how? If so, alienated in which areas of activity? Do the white supremacist racists help cause the non-white people of the known universe to be alienated from each other? Are the white supremacist racists deliberately alienated from the intention to produce justice, balance between people? That's, I think, you should ask in that question.
Okay, Linwood, when you get into a debate with somebody, go for it. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, what's up?
Mr. Hartman, thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome.
I'm not calling to correct you in any way because
feel free.
As always, you pretty much nail it. But when we talk about the death squads in Guatemala, specifically, for example, and the installation of many of them by the Reagan and during that era, I think what we need to remember is that it goes much, much, much further back than Reagan.
Oh, it goes back to the 1700s. It goes back to the Monroe Doctrine.
Well, I'm thinking more modern times, and it was Eisenhower who first interfered in Central America in the modern era and employed none other than Edward Bernays, Freud's nephew, who used Freudian psychology to manipulate the American public and renamed propaganda as public relations.
Right.
And it was the United Fruit Company that was having problems, of course, in Nicaragua because Jacob Arbenz, the newly elected leftist president, wanted to not nationalize necessarily the United Fruit Company's enterprises, but wanted fairer treatment of the workers, et cetera, et cetera. And Eisenhower hired Bernays, the public relations expert, to go and convince the American people that communism was on our doorstep, installed death squads, and murdered thousands upon thousands of Guatemalans. And we need to remember that Eisenhower was, no saint either, that it wasn't just Reagan.
Sure. And thank you for that history, Nicholas. You're absolutely right. And I would add, by the way, Edward Bernays was the guy that was hired by Democratic President Woodrow Wilson to sell World War I to the American people. This was when public relations was literally invented, was in the 19-teens by Bernays and with the help
himself.
Right.
Have you watched the documentary The Century of the Self?
Yes. Adam, what's his name? Adam, what's his last name? But yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yes, I read it. Or I watched
production.
Yeah.
Oh my Lord.
Yeah, Adam, whatever his last name is, he did like 3 or 4 of those that are all equally mind-boggling. Nicholas, I need to move along, but thank you. Thanks for filling out the history there. It's okay. So it's 2 Republican presidents, although there were some Democrats that didn't comport themselves all that well. Lyndon Johnson didn't back away from that, and look, look at what he did in Vietnam. Anyhow, Nicholas, I got to move along. Say what?
Okay, it's been a very long, ugly history.
Yeah, amen. Nicholas, thanks for the call. By the way, check this video out. This is floating around on YouTube. I have not authenticated this, but it has been reported from several sources as being accurate. I'm assuming that it is, but let me just put that caveat on here. We don't know exactly, the provenance of this thing, but like I said, it's floating all over social media. This is it kind of speaks for itself. This is a woman at an event at which Steve Bannon was giving a speech.
Never in my life did I think I would like to see a dictator. But if there's going to be one, I want it to be Trump.
And if you're not watching, Steve Bannon is applauding her, and the room stands up and gives her a standing ovation. Never in my life did I think I'd want to see a dictator, but if there's going to be one, I want it to be Trump. This is scary stuff. John in Stamford, Connecticut. Hey, John, what's up?
Yeah, hi, how are you? Listening to your program, and I'm a little disappointed. I mean, you're saying that the criminals don't want to travel across 100 miles to kill people. No, they don't want to do that, okay? They want to cross over and have a good life like everybody else. But you got to admit that there's good people and bad people crossing. And the bad people will cause crime in this country. I mean, it's not that simple that, nobody's going to cross 100 miles to kill people. They'll kill them wherever they want to kill them.
I think you just made my point, John. I'm not sure why you think you're debating me.
Well, because they come over for a good life like everybody else.
Sure.
And if a person is a good person, he's a good person.
Yeah, if part of that good life is killing people, that's what they're up to. I get that. But, what am I missing here?
Well, you're missing the fact that you know that no criminals come across the border illegally.
Well, you know, what I was saying is professional criminals are not going to cross the border
not
illegally.
Professional. That's a different story. No, professional. There's no hitman or nothing.
Well, that's what I don't mean necessarily people who do it for you know, who have other people pay them, but look, you know, people who are looking to make a living in ways that are you know, criminal, or people who want to harm other people are A, going to grab the low-hanging fruit, which is going to be in South and Central America, or B, if they decide they want to come to the United States to do this, they're in all probability not going to be the desperate, you know, ragtag bands of refugees who are trying to come across the border. My point is that the border wall is, you know, the main thing that Donald Trump is saying is that we need to build his wall to stop criminals, gang members, rapists, and drug dealers from coming into the United States. And what I'm saying is that gang members, rapists, drug dealers, and criminals, if they want to come into the United States, they're not going to cross the desert. That's what desperate people do. That's what dispossessed people do. Those folks, you know, that former category of bad guys, they're going to show up at you know, along with a million other people every day in one of the normal border crossings, or they're going to fly into the United States. That's my point.
No, that's not true, sir. It's you know, look what's happened to the kids and the girls being raped along the way, and that's.
Yeah, that's my point. The low-hanging fruit is in Mexico. You know.
But that, no, don't stop there. No, that's happening on the way. Then this thing's happening in this country too. Okay.
This guy that they turned into a demon in San Francisco, who killed this white girl there, you know, whose name I can't remember. He had been deported 4 times. Fox News keeps repeating that. What they don't repeat is that every time he came back into the United States, the way that we know he came back into the United States 4 times and was deported 4 times is because he came through the border at Tijuana 4 times, or one of those legal borders in Southern California. I believe it was Tijuana. I mean, that's my point. I don't see where building a wall is going to have anything to do with our crime rate.
Yeah, you're missing the point. There's people that know.
No, I'm saying the point is that it's demagoguery. John, thanks for the call. You know, apparently we're not going to convince each other of anything on this. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler wars on the True People's Media. How should we be looking at this? I think that it's really important to call out Donald Trump and the Republican Party's essential racism on this. This is what they're using, fear.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And it's a racialized fear and a subset of also a culturalized fear. It's a fear of other. And that's what demagogues traffic in. That's what dictators traffic in. And welcome back. Gary in Overland Park, Kansas. Hey, Gary, thanks for watching on our website. What's up?
Yeah, Tom, I wanted to talk about your border wall topic and the drug gangs that fuel the refugees that come up here. Mm-hmm. And it occurred to me there may be something circular going on with all of this. The drug gangs are basically fueled with money from Americans because Americans are unhappy. The concentration of wealth has skyrocketed, and it's squeezed Americans. They have less job security, less buying power, more outsourcing, more demands put on them. Consequently, that leads to increased drug use. And then as you have increased drug use, that fuels the drug gangs, that drives the refugees out of Central America because the drug gangs become more powerful. The refugees come across the border. Then, as the refugees come across the border, some super rich lobbyists and their backers use that as a way to pit Americans against each other. Then they can pit white people against brown people and use that as a twofer.
Yep.
So, one, they not only get the increased concentration of wealth, which drives the drug traffic, but they also then get the benefit of dividing the opposition by getting white people to attack brown people over the border wall.
Yep.
It seems somewhat circular almost.
No, it is, and it's one of those. It's one of those things that it's called generative. It feeds on itself and grows over time. At least in the right wing Foxosphere, you know, the hate radio sphere. And that's why I think it's important for us to periodically reach out to those people, bring them on this program, and basically debunk it and show how this is craziness. Gary, thank you. Very well said. Morris in Long Beach, California, listening on KPFK. Hey, Morris, what's up?
Yeah, Bill Maher says that people on the left are afraid to go on Fox News. So you got a job assignment. The kids told me to tell you this, Mr. Hartman. You're the only one with the skill set to go on Fox News and let them control whatever debate they want. You go over there and you debate them because we need that audience over there. Okay, now when they do their filibustering and they're trying to change the narrative, you're the kind of guy that can hold your point. So anyway, when you have those segments where you're doing your reading and whatnot, one of them is going to be where you are on Fox News representing the lefty.
Yeah,
nobody else is qualified to do that except
you know. And I've been on Fox News a couple of times in the last few months. It's probably been over a month. And in fact, I sent a note to Louise and Sean this morning. Leland Vitter, the guy who invites me on his show on Fox, he's one of the weekend hosts. He is one of the guys that Trump trashed yesterday, or day before yesterday, in his tweets, because he's a news guy, not a right-wing opinion guy. And I think he's more open to actually having debates. So, you know, you know, maybe we need to reach out to him and say, I'm available. But bottom line, yeah. And I think that the Democrats, even though the Republicans did not allow a single RNC primary debate to be moderated by or conducted on MSNBC, not one, I still think, I disagree with Tom Perez on this Fox News thing. And I think that the DNC should allow one of their primaries to happen on Fox News.
But Mr. Tom, I'm telling you the truth, man. It's about skill set. It's about skill set. You've had a lot of training with these knuckleheads. So when you first started,
a lot of practice.
People, I thought something was wrong with you. Okay, but you're the only guy that I know of personally that I listen to, and I listen to everybody, that can talk to those people and be able to speak a language which you can resonate with them. You're the only guy that can do it.
Yeah.
If you got somebody else, let me know.
Okay. Thank you, Morris. Great to hear from you. You know, I'm here. I'm ready. I'm available, and I'm having a good time. We'll be right back. It's coming up on, what is it, about 10 minutes before the hour. Welcome back. 10 minutes before the hour, and Rich in Indiana. Hey, Rich, what's up?
Hey, man. I wanted you to know that I am so grateful for your program and the people that listen to it. Shout out to Mr. Cabot. Thank you, sir. Last summer, you had Wendell Potter on, and he described the FUD, the FUD campaign of fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Right.
And then somebody had the smarts to say, and divided, we could double that D. I was listening to David Pakman last week, and he was able to define, and I thought really quite well, the more or less three categories that Trump supporters can be described with. The first two have to do with their critical thinking not being well trained, as someone who is ignorant of the facts, misled, or somebody who actually is just coping with learning difficulties. And so the information that's coming at them is an overwhelm, as it's designed to be. The third group of people were these self-dealing, disingenuous, hypocritical, culture of corruption, cruel people who are willing to be this disinformation, support this thing for their own personal enrichment.
Yeah, there's a fourth group that he missed that I think is actually larger than those three groups. And that's the authoritarians, the people who grew up in authoritarian families.
Absolutely.
They want a big daddy. This woman who just, you know, we just played the clip a minute ago, this woman who said, I'd never thought I'd want a dictator in the United States, but if we were to have one, I want it to be Donald Trump. That's an authoritarian mindset. And the authoritarians are drawn to right-wing hate radio and Fox News the way that flies are drawn to a carcass. And I think that, frankly, the largest cohort of people who aggressively promote the ideas that you find on Fox News, the people who you are, who are filling my Twitter feed constantly and my Facebook feed, with right-wing hate, those are the authoritarian followers, in my opinion.
I would cite a statement made by Derek Jensen. He said, "We are a people addicted to power over others." Yes. That is literally what our country is defined by. Our history has taught us to be this way.
Yes.
And think about the tool that we're currently being overwhelmed by, the Internet. DARPA created this thing for making war and doing business, doing commerce. And that is precisely how this whole thing is organized. And if you'll just join the dots to that book that came out a couple of weeks ago, Shoshana Zuboff's book. She's a Harvard Business School professor about surveillance capitalism. This whole thing is this giant tool to grab these people in a one-to-one marketing moment and ambush their imagination.
Sure. And that's, that's what's happening, and people don't even realize it, but that's what's happening to make money. I've always thought that a great novel would be, or a great MacGuffin for a novel, a plot device for a novel, would be, some guy who works inside the bowels of Amazon, for example, or even the CEO, although, that would be more of a stretch, but, some guy who works inside Amazon who has access to people's purchases history and therefore knows the people who are buying things that they would really rather not go to a retail store to buy because they're private, personal, embarrassing, sexual, indicate their lifestyle, and then goes to those people privately and threatens to blackmail them, using social media or whatever with their purchase history. And then that turns into like a murder mystery or something. It's always seemed like a good MacGuffin. But the bottom line is that kind of information has been aggregated about us. And right now it's being used to sell to us, but it can also be used. And frankly, this is the thing that concerns me about the fact that we learned this morning that the Trump campaign has spent $5 million on Facebook and Twitter advertising, and the most any of the Democrats have spent is about $1 million over the last year. And that, and these guys are sophisticated. These guys know what they're doing, and they know how to micro-target who they're doing it to. So, Rich, thanks for the call. Deborah in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Deborah, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I have been volunteering for the last 3 days to help refugees get to their sponsors. They were detained in El Paso by ICE, and they have been released by ICE, and now they're going to their sponsors. And your first, guy you talked to, Eric, I mean, until you're out there and meeting these, and I know he says that he has and he worked there, but I have to say these families are nothing but beautiful, wonderful people that want a better life. And, I mean, we gave used clothing and a few toys to families on Sunday, and they were thanking us 5 times and hugging us. And then when we got them off onto their planes or trains to go to their sponsors, they're thanking us. And I can't see anything in criminal activity or drug addiction. I just see these mothers and fathers wanting a better life for their children, which is what people in the United States want for their children.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what we all want. And to the extent that, if somebody wants to come to the United States, quote, for a better life, and their life isn't all that terrible where they're coming from, that's the point at which I say, we've got borders. There's this thing called citizenship in every country in the world. If you don't have citizenship and you don't have borders, you really don't have a country. Trump is right about that, sadly, but that's the way it is. But on the other hand, if somebody is fleeing terror, we have an obligation as human beings to open the door to them. They are the stranger that Jesus talked about in Matthew 25. We have an obligation as human beings, and particularly when they're fleeing terror, that we, as Nicholas pointed out, the Reagan and the Eisenhower administrations had a hand in creating, then we have an obligation to take them in. Deborah, thank you for sharing your story with us. It's a powerful one, and I appreciate the call. We'll be right back. It is, it's coming up on the top of the hour. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Hey, over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's there's just it's there. It's there for you. And it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff. And you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great. In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time. And if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture, whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided, by the secret hope of discovering beyond the pleasant wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. The congressman from Iowa, Steve King, by the way, in the previous hour, if you missed it, we had a debate with Eric Caron, a former U.S. special agent and diplomat and author, and he was saying basically that we need to secure the border on the southern frontier, as it were, because killers and rapists are coming across. And I just asked the simple question, you know, if you were somebody who wanted to kill people, you got a kick out of that. Or if you were somebody who wanted to rape people, that was your thing, and you were in Mexico, why would you want to come to the United States, where it's much harder to do and much easier to get caught? Why not take the low-hanging fruit in Mexico? But if you've decided, no, I only want to kill and rape Americans, why wouldn't you just cross at the border, at the legal crossing places? Or why wouldn't you get on a plane in, one of those cities in Mexico, fly from Cancun to Los Angeles? I mean, there's direct flights every day, right? Why wouldn't you do it the way that, and then the other argument he made was, we need to, 9/11 taught us that we need to keep these people out. Well, all 19 of the 9/11 hijackers came here on airplanes with visas, student visas, work visas, tourist visas, but they all came here legally. Yes, they overstayed their visas, and, we should do something about that. But what does that have to do with the wall on the southern border again? So anyhow, apropos of that, I mean, the bottom line is that the whole wall and the southern border thing is really not about immigration. And it's really not about crime. What it's really about is that the United States of America is getting browner. And white supremacists, white nationalists, white terrorists have been freaked out about this for a long time. Louise and I went to, back when we lived in Atlanta, in Georgia. This was like in the 1980s. I forget which election cycle it was. But Pat Buchanan was running for president. It was in the Republican primary. And he was grabbing some traction. And we took our kids. Our youngest was, she was small enough that she sat on my shoulders. I think she was maybe 2. And we took our kids to this, and before we went, we said, you know, what you're going to probably see here, maybe nothing, or this may be the kind of rally that you would have seen in Germany in 1932. And so I'd just like to show it to you. And sure enough, we got in there. They locked the doors, or they made it very difficult to get in or out. The security was bikers and skinheads with swastikas. The guy who introduced Pat Buchanan went on a long rant about the Jewish bankers controlling the world. Pat Buchanan continued that, but instead of saying Jewish bankers, he kept using the phrase, those people. I mean, there's a long province to this, right? This idea that people who are not, quote, us are the ones coming to get us. And the latest, and using that, using the us and them to essentially instill fear in people. This is one of the triggers that is wired into us as mammals. And certainly as primates. We see this in other primate populations. Chimpanzee troops will go to genocidal war with each other. It was Jane Goodall who documented this. And this was literally one troop that had previously split into 2. So this is wired into us. We have to realize that war is not an aberration. It's an expression of something that's deep in our genetic code, that at some point in time was some kind of a survival advantage for our species. But right now, with 7 billion people on the planet, well, I'd say actually not just right now, but for at least the last 10,000 years, has not been so useful to us, particularly when you combine it with the agricultural revolution and technology. Go back and read Dan Quinn's book, Ishmael, if you want to know what I'm talking about there. So we're wired to be freaked out about the other. We're wired to react to the other in ways that include violence. In fact, we're wired to even kill the other if we feel genuinely threatened, or to cheer it on, as we do as we watch the bombing of cities in the Middle East, for example. In Iraq and Afghanistan, we were all, yeah, drop those bombs, and you know, absolutely innocent people were being slaughtered, as George W. Bush declared 2 unnecessary and illegal wars in the Middle East, both of them based on lies. Afghanistan was not responsible for Osama bin Laden. And in fact, they offered to arrest him and turn him over to a third country. And George W. Bush said, no, I'd rather have a war. I mean, you know, keep in mind, he told his biographer, Mickey Herskowitz, in 1999, that if he became president, he was going to have a war. And it wasn't going to be a short war like his daddy had. He was going to have a long war, because that's how you get reelected. And Donald Trump was paying careful attention. He's getting ready for his war in Venezuela. You mark my words. So into this room, this basement with 2 inches of gasoline on the floor, right? Standing in gasoline up to our ankles, holding a matchbook, into this room steps Representative Steve King of Iowa. With an online meme, with an internet meme, with a picture made up of 2 cartoon characters that look like 2 human beings, and they're made up of blocks that are essentially the states, the red states and the blue states. So you got a red person and a blue person, and they're punching each other. And he comes out with this meme that says there's 8 trillion bullets out there on one side. And who's going to win the Civil War? Civil War? Really? I mean, this is This is Steve King, Congressman Steve King, who used to come on this program. He's been unwilling to for some years now. I wonder why. Who is just like this unrepentant, open racist, suggesting that we should have a civil war in the United States and that the side that has the most guns is going to win. This is absolutely unhealthy. You know, 1 trillion bullets is a lot of death, and pointing out that one side is well armed while the other side isn't, pointing that out to deranged people like the terrorists who shot up Christchurch, New Zealand, or the hate-filled bigots who've been murdering people in the United States for years, just pointing that out to them. Some among them are going to take that as a call to arms. You know, we've already suffered one brutal civil war, and a lot of people died. 600,000 people died in that civil war. And what happened after the Civil War? Well, there were still a bunch of people in the House of Representatives who thought the Confederacy was just a fine thing. And how did the House of Representatives deal with them? These people who were still willing to fight the Civil War? They expelled them. I'm calling on Nancy Pelosi and the leadership of the Democratic Party in the U.S. House of Representatives, since they control the House, to begin expulsion hearings. To begin hearings to determine whether Steve King should be expelled from the U.S. House of Representatives for promoting a civil war. You think what Ilhan Omar said was a bad thing? This is mind-boggling. A civil war in the United States, encouraging Americans to take up weapons against other Americans? I mean, how does it get worse than this? And this is a Republican that the rest of the Republicans are saying, well, yeah, he's here. I mean, we're kind of embarrassed by him, but, you know, we kind of agree with him. Come on, guys. In fact, it shouldn't even be Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic leadership saying it's time to expel Steve King from the U.S. House of Representatives. It should be the Republicans. If they have any courage, if they have any belief in the ideals of this country, they should be calling for this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hell, if they have any understanding of the horrors of a civil war, they should be calling on Steve King to be expelled. And welcome back. Chris in Irvine, California. Hey, Chris, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thank you. I wanted to make a couple of points about the demonization of South American immigrants. Mm-hmm. First of all, I wanted to correct you if I could. When you use the term illegal aliens, that's a dehumanizing
I agree,
kind of
and I tend, when I'm using my own language with my own people, I will say undocumented, you know, people who are undocumented
immigrants.
Or undocumented immigrants. Yeah. Well, they're technically not an immigrant if they haven't applied for immigration status, but you know, undocumented aliens, undocumented persons. You know, I get that, and I've gotten that for years and years. But you know, if somebody's using that language, I'm going to use that language back just to so that they get my point, rather than trying to just get into semantics with them.
So my second point, so even if we could stop all future criminals, if we could foresee the future and say, you know, if at some point you're going to rape somebody, stop all future criminals from entering the U.S., we wouldn't make a dent in the violence that exists in this country, because we, American citizens, homegrown, are more violent than they are.
Yeah, one of the numbers that is lacking, and it's probably out there and I just have missed it, Chris, but and if anybody has it, you know, on the tip of their tongue or knows where to find it, send it to us, is what percentage of crime in the United States is committed by people who are here without documentation? I'm guessing it's...
But we do know that they're statistically less violent than we are.
That's right.
And there's so little concern by these people about the white supremacist shooters and other homegrown violent criminals that we foster here.
Right, so
that's how you can tell that it's racism that's underlying the motivation and not actually safety of the public.
Right, so if we have, say, 11 million people here, without documentation. That and there's 340 million people roughly in the United States. You know, 11 million people is what is that as a percentage? 3%?
I'm not a math person.
Yeah, I am not either, unfortunately. I think that's roughly 3% of the population of the United States is people who are here without documentation. And if they were committing crimes at the same rate as you know, actual American citizens, you would have 3% of our crime rate caused by those folks. And I'm guessing that it's less than 1%.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that the legitimate insecurities and fears that people have about the state of the world and our future are being hijacked and directed into racism by the right-wing media.
Yes.
And that's why it falls apart the moment you start to question, because it really just comes down to racism. They're no more violent than American citizens are.
Yeah.
So
and
that was my point.
racism comes down to hate and fear, this kind of, you know, kind of born at the hip, these twins, you know, these twin emotions that feed each other. And, you know, you throw out some hate and then you throw out some fear, and then you throw out some hate and then you throw out some fear. And they kind of bind in the, I believe it's the amygdala, you know, the fight or flight part of the brain. They both have the same effect. And Trump is, you know, he telegraphs the hate and he explicitly proclaims the fear. And
well, it goes back way before Trump to,
obviously.
You know, Rupert Murdoch has been making millions off of this his whole life. So.
Oh, yeah. Oh, but you know, it goes back to yellow journalism in the United States. I mean, it goes back to the founding of the Republic. It goes back to John Adams and the Alien and Sedition Act, Chris. Chris, I got to run. I'm sorry. But thank you for the call. We'll be back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. Stick around. We'll be right back. Hey, over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's you know, there's just it's there. It's there for you. And it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff. And you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Frank in Caldwell, Idaho. Hey, Frank, what's on your mind?
I was wanting to talk to you about this open borders garbage you're talking about. If they're going to have a civil war, it's going to be because of people like you.
I don't know anybody who's advocating open borders, Frank. Do you? Can you name one person? Well,
yeah, you don't want...
Actually, Frank, I do know one person who's in favor of open borders, Ron Paul. The libertarians believe that there should be no borders to labor, that anybody should be able to work anywhere in the world. So, and the libertarians are a subset of the Republican Party. So Ron Paul and Rand Paul are in favor of open borders, but I don't know of any Democrat who is. Do you?
You sound like you are.
I'm not in favor of open borders. I said just a few minutes ago on this program, if you don't have borders and you don't defend your borders and you don't have citizenship and you don't use citizenship, you don't have a country.
Well, then why are you defending the illegals banned here?
What I'm saying, Frank, is that the argument from the last hour, this guy came on and he said, you've got people who are coming into this country and they are working illegally and some of them are committing crimes. And therefore, we need to build a wall. And what I said to him was, building a wall is not going to stop criminals from coming into the United States, and it's not going to stop people who come here to work. You want to stop people who are coming here to... Let me finish my sentence, Frank. You want to stop people who are... And I'll let you talk. You want to stop people who are coming here to work? Start throwing rich white employers in jail like we did before 1986 when Reagan stopped doing that. That'll stop people from coming here to work if there's no work for them, number one. And number two, if you want to stop criminals, build your criminal justice system. The worst thing you can do if you want to stop criminals, particularly among the community of undocumented immigrants, is the worst thing you can do is to say that we're going to send ICE in if you call and try to turn in your neighbor who's in the process of robbing somebody's house. Frank, if an immigrant, if a person in this country without documentation, if what you would call an illegal alien was in this country and they were breaking into your house right now, and one of your neighbors was also an illegal immigrant, would you want them to be afraid to call 911 and turn that person in because they were afraid that ISIS was going to show up?
Neither one of them should be here. I had my father killed by the illegal. I had a nephew killed by an illegal.
I agree that people who are not citizens in this country should not be here without a visa, without some sort of documentation. They should not be here illegally.
I believe we should deport every one of them.
You know, fine. Good luck. You know, that is not. You started out by saying that I'm here supporting open borders. No, I'm not, Frank.
Well, then don't call them undocumented. Call them what they are. They're illegals.
They are, well, they're performing an illegal act by being here. You can use that language if you want. It doesn't matter, Frank, what language we're using. What we're talking about here are human beings on the one hand and policies that make countries or don't make countries on the other hand. You can't. This is why I think, and I realize that Steve Bannon is essentially saying this same thing, but I think that it's true that when Europe did the Schengen zone, and they said, okay, anybody can travel from any country to any other country, anybody can work in any country, we're basically not going to have countries anymore, we're going to call it the Eurozone, that was a prescription for disaster because individual countries couldn't control their labor forces. It wasn't about race, although that's the way that Bannon is playing it. It wasn't about religion, although that's the way Bannon is playing it. It's about economics. And exactly what I was predicting would happen back 20 years ago when they initiated this stuff is what has happened. People from the poorest countries in Europe are flooding the wealthy countries in Europe, and now people in the wealthy countries in Europe are starting to react to that economic hurt. And then people like Steve Bannon come along and say, "Oh, it's the brown people, don't you know?" Just like white people in America are responding to Ronald Reagan's policies of deunionizing the country, of wiping out the unions. You know, when Reagan came to office, a third of America was unionized, which meant 2/3 of working people in America had the equivalent of a good union job with good pay, paid vacations, pension plans, health benefits, the whole thing. And Reagan destroyed that. Reaganism has completely destroyed this.
Let's get back to our conversation.
And as a consequence of that, you got a lot of people who are scared to death, and then bigots come along and say to these people like, these scared white people, say to them, well, you know who's taking your job? It's that brown guy from Mexico. That's who you should hate. Be here. Exactly, but who's hiring him? It's a rich white guy.
But you know what?
It's a rich white guy. It's Donald Trump at the Doral Country Club hiring people from out who are not here with documentation. It is Donald Trump's big donors in the construction industry who are hiring people here without documentation. It's Donald Trump's big.
What does that have to do with our conversation?
What's our conversation, Frank?
Our conversation is get rid of the illegals and quit supporting them being here. They're illegals. They are foreigners in America. They have no right to be
Frank,
here.
If you want somebody who came to this country for a job, not to be here, take away the job.
I don't want them. I don't want them. They need to be ran out of this country.
So, Frank, join my call to start putting people like Donald Trump and Don Trump Jr., who had years of text message correspondence with a guy who was in this country without documentation running his country club. Put those people in prison. Join my call to put Donald Trump Jr. in jail right now for hiring people who are here without documentation. Will you do that, Frank?
Why are we talking about Trump? We're talking about illegals.
I'm talking about rich white guys who are exploiting people who are just desperate to get a better job, who are trying to improve themselves. Frank, I get it. We'll be back. It's 27 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
By the way, and Frank, if you're still listening, I know this will shock you, but the largest percentage of people who overstay their visas in the United States are Canadians. Hi, for our book club today, we're reading from Bernie Sanders' new book, Where We Go From Here, 2 Years in the Resistance. This is from the introduction. During my campaign for president in 2016, I stated over and over again that the future of our country was dependent upon our willingness to make a political revolution. I stressed that real change never occurs from the top down. It always happens from the bottom up. No real change in American history, not the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, the environmental movement, or any other movement for social justice has ever succeeded without grassroots activism, without millions of people engaged in the struggle for justice. That's what I said when I ran for president. That's what I believe now. That's what I've been working to accomplish over the last several years. At a time of massive and growing income and wealth inequality, as our nation moves closer and closer to an oligarchic form of society, we need an unprecedented grassroots political movement to stand up to the greed of the billionaire class and the politicians they own. And the good news is we're making progress. People in every region of our country are standing up and fighting back against the most dishonest and reactionary president in the history of the republic. In state after state, they're also taking on establishment politicians who are more concerned about protecting their wealthy campaign contributors than they are with the needs of the middle class and the working people they're supposed to represent. We're making progress when millions of people in every state in the country take to the streets for the Women's March in opposition to Trump's reactionary agenda. We're making progress when an unprecedented grassroots movement elects a young African American as mayor of Birmingham, Alabama. We're making progress when tens of thousands of Americans turn out at rallies and town hall meetings to successfully oppose the Republican effort to throw 32 million people off health insurance. We're making progress when governors and local officials announce in response to student demands tuition-free public colleges and universities. We're making progress when over the past 2 years, hundreds of first-time candidates of every conceivable background run for school boards, city council, state legislature, and Congress, and many of them win. The good news is that the American people are far more united than the media would like us to believe. They get it. They know that over the past 40 years, despite a huge increase in worker productivity, the middle class has continued to shrink while the very rich have become very much richer. They know that for the first time in the modern history of the United States, our kids will likely have a lower living standard than us. The bad news is that instead of going forward together, demagogues like Trump win elections by dividing us. The bad news is that too many of us are getting angry at the wrong people. I was not an immigrant picking strawberries it was not an immigrant picking strawberries at $8 an hour who destroyed the economy in 2008. It was the greed and illegal behavior of Wall Street. It was not transgender people who threw millions of workers out on the street as factories were shut down all across the country. It was profitable multinational corporations in search of cheap labor abroad. Our job, for the sake of our kids and grandchildren, is to bring our people together around a progressive agenda. Are the majority of people in our country deeply concerned about the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality that we are experiencing? You bet they are. Do they believe that our campaign finance system is corrupt and enables the rich to buy elections? Overwhelmingly, they do. Do they want to raise the minimum wage to a living wage and provide pay equity for women? Yes, they do. Do they think that the very rich and large corporations should pay more in taxes so that all of our kids can have free tuition at public universities and colleges? Yep. Do they believe that the United States should join every other major country and guarantee health care as a right? Yes, again. Do they believe climate change is real? You got to be kidding. Are they tired of the United States of America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, falling apart at the seams with roads, bridges, water systems, wastewater plants, airports, rails, levees, and dams either failing or at risk of failing? Who isn't? Further, a majority of the American people want comprehensive immigration reform and a criminal justice system that is based on justice, not racism or mass incarceration. Today, what the American people want is not what they're getting. In fact, under Republican leadership in the House, Senate, and White House, they are getting exactly the opposite of what they want. The American people want a government that represents all of us. Instead, they're getting a government that represents the interests and extremist ideology of wealthy campaign contributors. They want environmental policies that combat climate change and pollution and that will allow our kids to live on a healthy and habitable planet. Instead, they're getting executive orders and legislation that push more fossil fuel production, more greenhouse gas emissions, and more pollution. They want a foreign policy that prioritizes peacemaking. Instead, they're getting increased military spending and growing hostility to our long-term democratic allies. They want a nation in which all people are treated with dignity and respect and where we continue our decades-long struggle to end discrimination based on race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and nation of origin. Instead, they have a president who seeks to win political support by appealing to those very deep-seated prejudices. During the last several years, I've worked hard in Washington, but I've also traveled to 32 states in every region of our country. I've seen the beauty, strength, and courage of our people. I've also seen fear and despair. I've talked to people with life-threatening illnesses in West Virginia who worry about what will happen to them or their loved ones if they lose the health insurance that keeps them alive. I've talked to young immigrants, dreamers in Arizona who are frightened to death about losing their legal status and being deported from the only country they have ever known. I talked to a single mom, a young single mom in Nevada, worried about how she can raise her daughter on $10.45 an hour. I talked to retirees and older workers in Kansas who are outraged that as a result of congressional legislation, they could lose up to 60% of the pensions they paid into and were promised as deferred compensation for a lifetime of hard work. Bernie Sanders, where we go from here.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Well, they're calling it the Freedom Caucus coup. Joan McCarter over at the Daily Kos. Apparently, Mick Mulvaney has become the permanent White House Chief of Staff, and he has installed 8 of his Freedom Caucus crazies. The Freedom Caucus is, I refer to them as the Cokehead Caucus. That's basically that group of right-wing Republicans in the House of Representatives who are heavily supported by the Koch brothers and their little network. Bizarre stuff. Steve in Albuquerque. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Yes, Tom. I've lived in the border state in New Mexico for most of my life. I'm your age, and I'd like to address people like Frank that you just spoke with when it comes to the political and financial benefits of wealthy people in this country that have been hiring these people for most of my life. I've worked with these people that don't speak English. They've been hired by state and local governments, whether they're truck drivers, carpenters, landscapers, working to plant the fiber optics that they're upgrading with the phone companies and the computer companies. It's just saturated, and it's been going on most of my life that I've lived here.
Ever since 1986, when Reagan stopped enforcing the law against hiring people who are undocumented, it just threw the doors open.
It coincides with a little Cuba in Miami when Castro released all of the people from his prisons and stuff and allowed them to migrate to America. This is always to keep the working man down, provide plenty of cheap labor. These people, they will work hard and they will provide a lot of profit for the white contractors that hire them.
Right, and by and large, they're good and decent people. And we do need immigration into the United States. Right, prior to the Trump administration, we had averaged around 1 million illegal immigrants a year. That's what we've been averaging for the last couple of decades. And Trump, I guess, has cut that back substantially. But it seems like at 1 million immigrants a year, we're in a comfortable place. But we need comprehensive immigration reform to make all this work. But the way that Reagan's set us on this path is not good for us. It's not good for the immigrants.
Well, even with NAFTA and even before NAFTA, they come up and down the main highways to bring produce from Mexico. Do you know how much produce we buy from them? It's amazing.
It's huge. Yeah.
I mean, so it's a benefit financially, and it's a benefit for the political right because they can have a contractor who's white hire 2 or 3 dozen of these guys to build homes and landscape them and do all the work, and they write it off as expenses, and they pay them under the table.
Right, and who keeps the profit? The rich white guy. Yeah,
you got
exactly.
It. Thank you, Tom.
Steve, thank you for the call. And anyway, Rudy in Riverdale, Georgia. Hey, Rudy, what's up?
He knocked it out of the park, Tom, the guy before me, because when I listen to people like Frank, this is where we are. We have to keep fighting and try to keep educating people because, Tom, I travel the heart of Florida every week, twice a week. And when I tell you that in the heart of Florida, there are more Mexicans than white people, believe me, these people are picking oranges, peppers, everything, Tom. And I can count on one hand the number of white people that I see out in those fields. Yep. So I'm just saying, I mean,
Right, and the response to that, Rudy, from the Republican right, this is from like the Eisenhower right, has always been, but, you know, if we actually had, you know, American citizens picking these crops, we would have to pay them more, and then the price of food would go up. And my response to that is, okay, fine, so the price of food goes up. Let's raise the minimum wage and make people, everybody, you know, able to afford food. But we shouldn't be depending for our food upon an exploited class of people, whether they're indigenous citizens, whether they're people who, you know, who are born in this country, or whether they are, you know, immigrants from another country. Just, you know, the idea of creating an economic system that depends on the exploitation, and then a double level of exploitation. If somebody's in this country without documentation, they're scared to death constantly, right? And so the employer has even more power over them. It's just wrong.
It's sad, Tom, because the guy you had on, I think it was yesterday, and he was explaining basically white America just going to have to stop being lazy and just stop taking for granted their freedoms, because what's going to eventually happen is every freedom that a white man has ever fought for, he's going to eventually lose it the way he's conducting himself right now.
It certainly seems to be going in that direction, Rudy.
You can't have it both ways.
Yep.
You can't, I mean, you're just going against the law of gravity. You can't have it both ways.
Yep. And I think this is, you know, this is one of the lessons that the world learned from you know, South Africa, the experience of South Africa. And, you know, we need to get this behind us. I saw that Elizabeth Warren has started talking about reparations, that we need to have a serious conversation in this country about reparations. We need to clean up our past, and then we also need to be dealing with our present. And both of those, you know, whether in the present, I'm talking about this thing about people from south of the border coming here, whether as refugees or whether to work, and then being demonized by Fox News and by the President of the United States. All of that stuff has racism at its core, and we need to clean that stuff up. Rudy, I need to move along, but thank you for the call. Gabe in Glen Ellen, Illinois. Hey, Gabe, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you, sir?
I am well. What's on
hey,
your mind?
I want to answer Mr. Frank or Fred, whatever, talked to you like
Frank.
10 minutes ago. You know, I'm in this country for 25 years. I'm illegal, and I'm white. I'm from Europe. And I feel very bad for all the Mexicans, for all the Latinos, for anyone coming from south of the border, because you know what? I came 25 years ago because your government let me so easy to come here. I applied. I didn't have even to apply for a visa. I went to the consulate. I say I like to visit the United States. They put me 10 years visa, 10-year visa. I came to United States in '94 to watch the soccer in Atlanta. And I know people. I'm an engineer, construction engineer, and they say, "Why you go back there? I give you a job here." I have two businesses now. Wow. I'm working for union. I have Social Security. I have pension. I have everything legal, but I'm not legal.
Wow.
And
basically, you're able to essentially get away with that, in quotes, and not to cast aspersions on you, Gabe, but essentially because you're white, nobody's noticing you. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. That's what I want to tell Mr. Fred. You know, and like you say, a lot of people coming from different countries, easy with visa, they stay over the visa, but because they are white, nobody pay attention to them. Yeah. I have my Social Security. I have my driver license in my pocket. I stop with the cops. Cops stop in the street. I talk nice. They talk nice to me. Census in 2000, when the census come to my house and see $500,000 house in Glen Ellen, they told me, citizen. I don't have to tell them yes or no. They say citizen, and they mark themselves on the census citizen. I was looking to my wife and say, yeah, I'm citizen. Why not?
Yeah. Yeah.
Then, you know,
I got
the races in this country start right when Mr. Trump, you know, took the office, because I never feel, even on my skin, I never feel so bad in this country till now. Now is so much pressure. Now is so much stress. Everybody is angry. Everybody is, you know, it's like you are afraid to talk. If they find a little bit you don't speak correctly English or you do something, everybody look at you. There was not such a thing before. There was nothing in 2000, 2001, 2003. Doesn't matter. I didn't vote. I cannot vote. But there was no stress like now. Now people are getting crazy.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Gabe. They really are.
Thank you very much, Tom.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Tom, for you, for Goldman, for everything, for Michelle in the morning. You guys are great.
Great. Thank you, Gabe.
Keep the good job. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your call.
I have 1 more year till my daughter is 21, and I will be citizen in 1 year. And I'm fine. Thank you.
Congratulations,
Yes.
Gabe. Thank you for the call.
You,
Amazing. Lisa in Sutherland, Oregon. Hey, Lisa, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. It's like continuing education with you. You need to be broadcast. You need to have your own show on Fox News. But I kind of think they're scared of you.
Well, that's why they got rid of Alan Combs. They really don't want dissenting voices unless they're incompetent dissenting voices, and that's the tragedy that the Democrats that they allow on Fox News tend to be the ones who kind of fall all over their own feet.
Yeah, well, I wondered if you could illuminate for me. I'm a little confused about the School of the Americas, where we exported the torture schools in South America, and I'm not sure if it was during the Pinochet regime in Argentina or during the Iran-Contra.
It was all of the above, Lisa. I would have to go back and check Google it to find out when the School of the Americas started. It's near Fort Benning, Georgia, as I recall. And but we have been training allies, the military of allies, I think, since the 50s.
Yeah. Well, see, this. Amy Goodman spoke of this on her program, but also I met the photojournalist for the democratically elected Colombian president. His name escapes me now, and she mentioned the School of the Americas as one of the primary problems as far as dividing the people, teaching them how to torture their own people, and so on and so forth, and all of the corruption around that. Now, I'm not sure. I think Henry Kissinger might have been the architect, along with
as I said, I think this happened before Kissinger, although he might have weaponized it. But isn't it bizarre that we have an entire school devoted to teaching people from south of the border how to run a military and how to run a police department, but we don't have a school funded by our government, but we don't have a school devoted to teaching them how to run a democracy? I mean, you would think that we would be promoting democratic rather than authoritarian values, but that's not the case, tragically. Lisa, thank you for the call. We'll be back in just a few minutes. We're going to check in with Talk Media News in just a second.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Actually, it'll be in 4 minutes. We're going to check in with Talk Media News, and so stick around. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Mark, watching Free Speech TV in hot Sulphur Springs, Colorado. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind?
Hey, good morning, Tom. I've been wanting to call you for a long time listener. I just wanted to call about the border since we're talking about it. My grandparents bought land on the Mexican border in California in about 1928. Lived within walking distance of Mexico. I've lived in Arizona. I'm basically on the border my whole life, and I find that basically walking across the border is something that very, very few people do. And right now it's March, and right about now the rattlesnakes will be coming out, and for the next 2 or 3 months, it'll be plumb dangerous out there in the dark. The next thing, aside from that, smuggling. I smuggled when I was a 19-year-old, and we went through a border. We went right through a crossing. That's the way it's done. I'm a retired gangster, and I'm very retired. But yeah.
So you had some drugs in your pocket or something like that, and because you were a white guy, you just walked through the border. Is that what you're saying, Mark?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, we didn't have it in our pocket, but we'd take an ounce across the border at a time, and that made me a nice fat living because I couldn't earn one.
Yeah.
Now, the other side, you've been talking about Ronald Reagan getting the construction unions. I'd spent 10 years struggling in food production, packaging, basically industrial,
yeah.
Mechanical.
I'll do it for you.
Yeah, at any rate, I finally found a good job for me. I apprenticed myself as a hot tile roofer in L.A. And I worked like a Marine Corps grunt for 3 years, got my journeyman card, And Reagan got elected.
And that was the end of that, huh?
Pretty much, it wasn't long.
Yeah.
It wasn't long, and my middle-class living that I struggled for so long to get went away.
Oh,
Well, of course, then I moved.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, finish yours. It's your story, Mark.
Well, okay. I want to run it down quick, too, because I'm a gabby guy. At any rate, I moved to Arizona because my folks because it was cheaper to live there, and it's a right-to-work state. And I went to work there 20 hours a week as a roofer, making $6 an hour. Well, I'd been making 21-something in the union.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe you earn every penny of that. But be that as it may, I couldn't make a living. I had a guy offer me $1,000 a week. I was living with my parents. $1,000 a week to be his bodyguard. And he sold drugs to topless dancers.
Wow.
And, I couldn't make a living. I was living with my mom and dad. I said, man, I'm 31 years old. I can't be living with mom and dad.
Yeah.
So I took the job, and it was great, and I did 6 years of that, and then I fell in love, got married, and quit all of that.
So what's the point of this whole story here, Mark?
The point is that, okay, the other point is about back to the border. MS-13, I remember them tagging in Orange County, California.
Oh, it's a gang that started in Los Angeles. It started in L.A. in the 80s.
Right, and I remember seeing a tag in Placentia, which is just not 20 miles away.
Yeah.
And I wondered, with the MS-13, I was a biker, so 13 was like, that stands for M, which stands for pot, which I wondered who they were. Never been really afraid of them in the West.
Yeah, Mark, I gotta pull a plug on this, but thanks for the call and your story of your union experience. One of my we used to live in a house with several other people, and one of the people living there was a guy who was a construction worker. He had a great union job, and then along came Reagan, and like you say, that was the end of that. We'll be right back. Hey, over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's there's just it's there. It's there for you. And it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff. And you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, a new book by Ellen Ratner. On the line with us is the chief foreign correspondent for Talk Media News, joining us from New York, Luke Vargas. Luke, the British government is facing a Wednesday deadline to agree to a Brexit deal. Increasingly, it seems like what I'm hearing from the European leaders is, Theresa May, now she just got blown up by the Speaker of the House saying, no, you can't have another vote on your offer, right, to Europe. It's got to be substantially different. And so she's going to Europe saying we want an extension. A couple of pieces in the Financial Times this morning about how the European leaders are saying, an extension for what? You're not offering anything new. Take it or leave it. It's looking to me like a hard Brexit is coming.
Yeah, on a lot of fronts, Theresa May's sort of hope, and there were reasons to suspect it might sort of tip in her favor at the last minute, have come crashing down, though. I mean, so first, as you mentioned, you've got the Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, basically saying you can't just present now for a third time the very same Brexit deal that you proposed back in December.
And he quoted a rule from 1604.
Right. I mean, it has an old precedent, but that doesn't mean it's an...
No, I mean, my point is this is a rule that has been followed since 1604.
Yeah, I think there is something to be said for the fact that he maybe could have brought that up several weeks ago when she polished off the same, bill for a second time. And that would have at least sort of, I kind of sympathize with him because clearly the actions of May's, leadership here reflects a sort of lack of understanding of the process. At the same time, if Burkow was really trying to avoid a crisis, which we're now in, he probably could have, made this, statement several weeks ago and thus put.
Well, there's another conspiracy theory floating around here, which is that he stopped her because he knew she was going to lose the vote, and he's on her side, and this was a way of avoiding humiliation for her and losing the vote.
It's hard to see how she doesn't emerge humiliated from this. Her own spokesperson within the last hour or so agreed with the premise of a question, saying that now Britain is in a political crisis. I think, and now you point out she's being blocked at the European Union level. The Élysée Palace in France has now put out a statement in the last few hours saying that, look, an extension is not a given. You need to show us that it's not just a delaying tactic and you're not just going to procrastinate for the full duration of a delay. I will point out, and this is probably a relatively low risk, but it is worth thinking about. And I just saw The Brink, the film about Steve Bannon's efforts last night to go around Europe and sort of cultivate far-right populist movements, that there has been a push by people like Nigel Farage and other members of the European Union Parliament from Britain who are in favor of Brexit to try and appeal to Poland and Italy in particular to see that if on Thursday, when the European Union would need to vote and will need a unanimity in order to agree to a possible Brexit extension, that if Poland or Italy, Matteo Salvini's government in Italy is very much aligned with the Brexiteers, if they block that, then it actually almost ensures a no-deal Brexit.
Does the EU work on consensus as opposed to majority?
On this issue, it will. And up until now, that's been working. I mean, even though you do have these sort of far-right governments coming into power whose interests, there are these sort of common interests now across a diverse block of countries, there has been a lot of consensus on Brexit issues so far. So I think that's a relatively low risk, but it's something to think about that, you have a possible scenario here where Italy sort of tries to defend the will of the British Brexiteers by blocking any effort to extend Brexit and work out a better arrangement.
Well, the hard Brexit is in a week and a half, isn't it?
It would be. And mind you, there was a vote last week that basically said, by a narrow margin, no deal Brexit is unacceptable, but it's non-binding. That's not law. And it's possible to see a scenario in which the likelihood of that has actually increased in the past few days. So we'll see what happens tomorrow. We don't know how long Theresa May will ask for a Brexit extension. Though mind you, if it's going to be more than several months, she will be forced to hold European Union elections in the United Kingdom, which is sort of insult to injury, and will cost the country upwards of $100 million to put on. And so she's going to suffer embarrassment no matter how this goes.
Amazing. Meanwhile, yesterday, Mike Pompeo held a press conference, and the only press he invited were faith-based media organizations. Now the question is being asked, how many of them were Muslim? And apparently the answer is 0. What the hell's going on here?
Yeah, a great way for the State Department to not have to answer that question is to just say, hey, we're not just going to release the list of call participants. And this is very worrisome. I mean, we've seen a bunch of sort of suspicious things, at least by my account, from the State Department, and particularly from Mike Pompeo recently, where he's been doing these American press tours. He spent like the last few days in Nebraska and Oklahoma and Texas, just, calling into local radio shows, talking about barbecue, answering questions about whether he's going to run for president again. And it was all paid for by the State Department and bundled up as public diplomacy, right? He's going to Texas to explain the Middle East peace process to people, to talk about the Iran deal, to educate new audiences about American diplomacy. It looks a little bit like, sort of laying the groundwork for a presidential campaign in the future, and then add to it the fact that this press call yesterday, in a very unprecedented fashion, was reserved for members of the religious press. And that we're not going to learn anything that was said, nor who was participating in that. That's pretty worrisome.
Yeah. I'd be astonished if there was a Muslim or a Hindu or a Jain or it's incredible.
We might see some lawsuits here, so the story's not over.
Well, that's good to know. Luke Vargas, thank you, Luke.
Thank you.
Luke Vargas with Talk Media News. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Safe, fight back!
Hey, over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's there's just it's there. It's there for you. And it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff. And you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great. Our book today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Age of Eisenhower, America and the World in the 1950s by William I. Hitchcock. This is from chapter 19, page 475, about 3/4 of the way through the book. Republicans of the 1950s knew how to sell a product. They pioneered the use of television advertising in politics, and at their national conventions in 1952 and 1956, they mobilized actors, dancers, acrobats, sports figures, crooners, jugglers, and sword swallowers to infuse their rather dull message of peace and prosperity with some pizzazz. In mid-July 1960, though, as the GOP faithful gathered in Chicago at the International Amphitheater, the same hall in which Ike and Dick had formed their political tandem 8 years earlier, the convention planners were running out of ideas. A giant elephant named Koa, on loan from Louisiana, proved to be too big to amble down the aisles of the hall and had to be returned. The torchlight parade of 500 young Republicans had to be canceled due to the fire hazard of their kerosene-soaked rags. Plans to get Henry Fonda into costume as Abraham Lincoln, a role he had played woodenly in the 1939 film Young Mr. Lincoln, were scotched when Fonda turned out to be a Democrat. Half the hotel rooms in Chicago remained empty a few days before the convention. Besides an absence of hoopla, the top Republican leaders had serious worries. A Gallup poll on the eve of the convention showed that since 1952, the Republicans had lost support among business and professional voters, white-collar workers, and farmers, three key demographic groups. And they had made no inroads among skilled and unskilled laborers who favored the Democratic Party by a ratio of 4-to-1. President Eisenhower's personal popularity had masked serious weaknesses in the Republican Party. As the Republicans gathered in Chicago, John Kennedy, a junior senator with little international name recognition, led Nixon in the polls by 4 points. And I should add, Nixon was the vice president, Eisenhower. The press corps, bored to tears by the lack of drama in Republican ranks, worked hard to breathe life into the candidacies of New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller and Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater, who might, they earnestly hoped, challenge Nixon for the GOP nomination from the left and the right. The Washington Post editorial page noted that both parties inclined toward moderate nominees like Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, and Nixon, but cautioned that, quote, an excess of moderation can yield a pudding devoid of flavor or shape, end quote, and hoped that Goldwater would add a dash of, quote, pepper to the otherwise bland old party's Chicago solemnities, end quote. Indeed, old guard supporters of the dear departed Bob Taft now had a new champion in the ruggedly handsome conservative from the Desert West. It was not to be. Goldwater did not seek the nomination and backed Nixon. Rockefeller, whom most veteran Republicans distrusted for his ideological elasticity and his vanity, pressured Nixon to adopt a number of Kennedy-like platform planks on issues such as defense spending, civil rights, health insurance, and housing. Nixon, terrified that a Rockefeller boomlet might snatch away his long-sought prize, caved into these demands before meeting with Rocky in New York on July 22nd, 3 days before the convention opened. Rockefeller, in turn, threw his support to Nixon in a feeble gesture of party unity. In extracting concessions from Nixon on the GOP platform, though, Rockefeller managed to weaken Nixon's case that he and he alone had the toughness to confront Khrushchev on the world stage. The real challenge Nixon faced in taking the leadership of the Republican Party did not come from Goldwater or Rockefeller. It came from Eisenhower. Of course, Ike supported Nixon's presidential bid since Nixon offered the best hope of extending the Eisenhower legacy. But the distance between those two men, which had always been great, never seemed wider than in 1960. Eisenhower had become the world's most respected, most recognized, and most liked man. For all of his apparent political weaknesses and occasional lapses in his mishandling of the U-2 affair, he occupied an unassailable place in the pantheon of great figures of his time. His war service alone would have placed him on history's pedestal, but he followed that with 8 years of dignified leadership of a country whose global power had reached unprecedented dimensions. When Eisenhower arrived in Chicago on July 26 to address the Republican convention, over 1 million Chicagoans lined the streets along his route to the Sheraton Blackstone Hotel. Shouts of joy rang through the miles of well-wishers. "We like Ike" signs dotted the scene, along with hand-painted expressions of thanks to the old warrior. Confetti, so dense that it stuck to Ike's moist and beaming face, poured from the rooftops. Banners and flags draped every storefront, and lampposts in a blaze of red, white, and blue. Seated before him, or behind him in the open-top presidential Lincoln, Illinois Governor William G. Stratton and Senator Everett Dirksen seemed like supernumeraries. It was Ike the crowd wanted. A loudspeaker in a truck following the motorcade blared out a popular tune by the Four Knights, "I Love the Sunshine of Your Smile." The president, visibly moved, told reporters outside the hotel, "It's one of the finest crowds I've ever seen." On Tuesday evening, Senator Dirksen, a famously orotund speaker in a profession known for producing magnificent windbags, came to the podium in the amphitheater to introduce the president. Few recalled that 8 years earlier, Dirksen had nominated Senator Taft. Anyhow, the book is The Age of Eisenhower by Hitchcock.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the third hour of our program. A lot going on in the world and in the news. And one of the things that I think is truly extraordinary is this bomb cyclone. Nebraska was particularly bad, heavily hard hit. 3 out of 4 of the people who have died from this bomb cyclone storm that hit the Midwest, which is a function of climate change, the warming of the Arctic, destroying the Arctic ice, which reflects sunlight and heat back into outer space, replacing it with dark water, which absorbs sunlight and heat, thus warming the Arctic 2 to 6 times faster, depending on where you are in the Arctic, than where we are, than the latitudes that we all live at, these kind of mid-latitudes. And the consequence of that is that the jet stream is falling apart, and that these air masses, they call them the polar vortex, is breaking into pieces, and these air masses are coming down and drooling down over Siberia, over parts of Europe, but principally over North America right now, at least North America to the east of the Rocky Mountains. And because the atmosphere has 6% more moisture in it right now, than it did just 50 years ago as a consequence of global warming, we're getting massively more rain. This, by the way, is the new normal. This is not some weird thing. This is absolutely now the norm. And if you, in fact, this morning in the Missouri River, they were showing some you know, before and after of the flooding pictures on the Missouri River on TV. And if you looked at the before pictures, you could tell where the floodplain was, right? Because you could see that the, you know, where the vegetation was and basically where the floodplain was. And you can see that there was lots and lots of construction on that floodplain. And then the after picture, of course, the floodplain is now flooded. Now, it might not have been flooded for the last 400 years or 600 or 800 years. It's an unusual event. But, you know, 500-year floods, 100-year floods, 1,000-year floods are now becoming, you know, 1,000-year floods are becoming 10-year floods, 500-year floods are becoming 3-year floods. You know, 100-year floods are becoming every other year. It's in parts of the United States. And this is, you know, very simple. This is not rocket science. I mean, you know, there's this article by Laura Riley in the Washington Post. The headline is, "Maybe it's a sign from God." She's quoting one of the farmers. Midwest floods devastate Nebraska farmers. No, it's not a sign from God. It's science. It's a sign from via weather that we have been polluting our atmosphere for the last 200 years in ways that the atmosphere can't deal with. And it's not like it's fighting back at us. It's just got a new state. In fact, it's in transition from an old equilibrium to a new equilibrium. And if it reaches that new equilibrium, it has been at that state 6 times in the history of the planet, we will be gone. It's not God that is coming after us. It's ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, Koch Industries, you name it. You name the fossil fuel company, the mining companies, the refining companies. That's who's coming after us. It's that is who is responsible for the devastation of Nebraska and you know, and the rest of the Midwest. That's who's responsible for, you know, I mean, pick your problem. You look around the world, there's just this absolute devastation that is happening right now in Bangladesh, in central and northern India. Myanmar right now is having flooding. I mean, they're all over the world as we speak. People are dealing with emergencies that have to do with weather, out of control weather. And meanwhile, the Trump administration and the entire Republican Party, the wholly owned captives, the wholly owned suck-ups to the fossil fuel billionaires and their buddies, continue to say, oh, there's no such thing as global warming. In fact, Trump is proposing in his budget, the Republicans are proposing in this budget that was published, the 2020 budget for the United States, Trump and the GOP and Mike Pence, they're proposing to gut the National Science Foundation. No more science investigations into what's going on in the Arctic. No more science investigations into what's going on in the Antarctic. And let's forget about doing any kind of scientific investigation into what's happening to our weather. That's the position of the Trump administration right now, to protect the profits of the fossil fuel billionaires who keep Republican candidates in office. I saw a guy from one of these front groups, I think it was Freedom Works, it might have been another one, on TV this morning. I wanted to throw up. You know, it was on one of the MSNBC shows that's being run by basically a right-winger. It's just astonishing to me that the real cause here. I mean, here you have the Washington Post with the headline wondering out loud, is this God? And I didn't see anywhere in this article or in any of the others. I mean, Mike Pence is going, right? He's going to go and he's going to pray with them. This is the guy who in 2000 said tobacco doesn't cause cancer. This is the guy who will reliably shill for whatever industry fronts him, whatever industry pays his bills. And make no mistake about it, no bones about it. It's the fossil fuel industry that put Republicans in power. And the billionaires, you know, being created by the fossil fuel industry. Meanwhile, we have, again, Mark Sumner, he does some just amazing writing over at dailykos.com. It's the story, he's got a picture of a water treatment plant for the contaminated water that's flowing out of an abandoned mine in Butte, Montana. And this is what our Interior Department and our Environmental Protection Agency are doing now to, quote, protect us. They're saying to billionaires who own big mines and things like that, coal ash, retention ponds, all this kind of stuff, that under Barack Obama's Clean Power Plan, they had to at least clean up their mines before they could dump them back on the community. And with the coal ash, they had to have, you know, it had to be protected. They had to isolate these poisons. And Trump has rolled that back. Mother Jones is reporting that companies now can bond themselves. And here's, for example, a single abandoned gold mine in the mountains south of the Fort Belknap Indian community in Montana has left the area with a legacy of discolored water so polluted with acid that contact with it makes the skin burn. The bill for cleaning up this one mine is already over $100 million, and they're still in the early stages of the cleanup. It's going to be $500 million in all probability to clean up this mine. Now, it used to be that when you start mining, you have to set aside money to cover what's called reclamation. But now Trump has said, oh, these companies can bond themselves. They can decide how much money to set aside. And if they run out of money, they can just declare bankruptcy and walk away, as apparently happened with this mine in Montana. We've got a serious problem in this country of out-of-control billionaires and out-of-control polluting industries, and we need to rein them in. And for that, we need a genuine political revolution. And that means we all need to be engaged and involved. We all need to be telling our friends about progressive media, like however you are hearing this show right now. We need to be waking our friends up and being willing to engage in conversation with people who completely disagree with us or have totally bought in to the Fox BS. We need to wake people up now.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's not just the fate and future of, you know, the quality of life in the United States. We're talking literally about planet Earth. And welcome back. Nancy in Chelan, Washington. Am I saying that right? Listening on KBCS?
Chelan.
Chelan, okay. Hey, what's up, Nancy?
Well, I just want your opinion on, we need to do our part. Like, we blame the corporations, but we're driving the cars, we're buying the plastics. You know, I'm so frustrated about, we're easy to blame, and I'm planning to go to D.C. on Earth Day and stay there, a Cindy Sheehan maneuver.
Mm-hmm.
So, we need 50,000 people there and say the new Green Deal, it's there, it shows you how to do it, so let's do it now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway,
Amen. And by the way, Nancy, we need to stop kicking ourselves. I mean, this was the Republican response to Al Gore back in the day. Was, oh, how dare you talk about fossil fuels and walking lightly on the earth when you have a 10,000 square foot mansion or bigger or whatever it was. And the simple answer is, and like you said, we all drive cars. Well, yeah, I mean, some of us are sort of making a transition. I bought a plug-in hybrid, so I haven't used gasoline in months. But or I've used gasoline actually twice in the last couple of months, but because, I went more than 30 miles away from home. But the bottom line is that even the manufacturer of that car consumed enormous amounts of fossil fuels. That as long as our government's policy, and this is where the change needs to happen at the level of policy, and that's why your call to go to D.C. is so important. As long as the government's policy is to subsidize the fossil fuel industry to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars a year just in the United States, trillions of dollars a year worldwide, as long as our government's policy is to subsidize the fossil fuel industry, and then you get states like, Rick Scott down in Florida did, where he actually pushed for and got laws passed that made it harder to solarize your home if you lived in Florida, because he was taking money from the local utilities who are privately owned. And as long as that sick kind of politics is going on, and as long as it's being dominated by the fossil fuel industry and utilities that are using fossil fuels, as happened in Florida, we're going to continue having these problems, and we need to stop punishing ourselves. You may need to get on an airplane to go to Washington, D.C. That's just the only way you're going to get there. And it's actually a more efficient, and you'll burn a hell of a lot less fossil fuel than if you drove across the country. And you know it's not about what we are doing. This is what the Republicans want to talk about. They want to blame the victims. They want to blame the consumers. But the fact of the matter is that the reason that we're driving gasoline-powered cars now, when other countries, Norway now doesn't even allow the sale of gasoline-powered cars in their country anymore, as of this moment. You can't sell a gasoline-powered car in Norway. You know, and why? Because they've decided that's it, enough already. But the reason that we're still buying gasoline-powered cars in the United States is because of policy, government policy that drives these decisions. And we can change that because electric cars are fully competitive. Solar and wind power are fully competitive with any kind of fossil fuel. In fact, in most parts of the country, they're cheaper than fossil fuels. And the only thing that's holding it back is political will. And that's why we need to be showing up. And that's why it's a great thing that you're going to D.C., Nancy.
Right. But why don't we stop driving one day a month?
Well, I'm all in favor of, I'm all in favor of doing everything I can, right? We carry a bag to the grocery store.
Right,
I bought a plug-in hybrid, because I didn't want to be burning any more fossil fuels. We try to, heat the house and all. We all do what we can, but let's not get into this god-awful thing of kicking ourselves when we're not perfect, and making perfection the enemy of the good. And just basically going along with the Republican talking points. Nancy, thank you for the call, and thanks for listening to KBCS. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and David in Woodland Hills, California. Hey, David, thanks for listening to SiriusXM. What's on your mind today?
Thank you. Great show today on so many topics, and great Steve King rant. I would hope something would happen there. I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah.
I would like to make the case, unfortunately, why I believe we are headed for very violent times. As you may remember, I'm part of a Facebook political group with liberals and conservatives. I wanted to honestly debate conservatives, and using Thom Hartmann water cooler logic, I was kicking ass on a regular basis. It was almost unfair. I got the group to start fact-checking and sourcing what they were saying, and then it began to become more and more name-calling on both sides with little or no debate, and the conservatives flat out refusing to critically evaluate Donald Trump. It just wasn't happening.
Right.
And I was getting very, very discouraged, and then the death threats started coming in.
To you as the administrator of this area on Facebook?
I wasn't the administrator. I was just a member, and my arguments were, Thom Hartmann water cooler arguments were so good, the only thing they could do was start death threats. And
wow.
You've seen The Godfather, right?
Yes.
Greatest movie ever made.
It's been a lot of years, but yeah.
There's a scene in it where the five families are at war. They've gone to the mattresses, and the old pro is talking to the young Michael Corleone, and he says, every generation or so, you got to get out the bad blood. There's no other way. They're not going to listen to reason. It's beyond that now. And I fear that as a nation, we may be there now. And there's one more thing I'd like to say. Somebody called in, and I think they said only you can talk on Fox News. And we all need to be calling all of these right-wing hate shows every single chance we get. I've called the Mark Levin show 3 or 4 times. He hangs up on me every time. Second time I called him, he hung up on me and yelled at me for the next 45 minutes. Through 2 or 3 commercial breaks, he comes back still yelling at me.
You're talking about the call screener?
No, Mark Levin.
Himself?
Himself. He's yelled at me for 45, and the topic was, why do conservatives hate the Constitution when it comes to promoting the general welfare.
Right.
And he started talking about, I think, Madison, who wrote the thing, who I think he was going to say that Madison was opposed to that. And I said there were a number of founding fathers, and they wrote it twice in there. But
sure.
So we all need to be calling these shows because it's the only way their audience hears something different.
Yeah. I'm impressed that Mark Levin actually put you on the air. I haven't listened to his show in a lot of years. In large part because I almost never drive, and that's where I was listening to right-wing radio. Yeah, I go on Fox when they ask me to because I think that we need to be talking back within their bubble. We need to, our voice needs to be heard. Their bubble is constantly coming into our bubble, as it were. You watch MSNBC is the closest thing that we have, or Free Speech TV obviously is a good progressive television network, but it doesn't have the quite the national penetration of MSNBC, and that network is like 50% Republicans. It's like, so the right-wing bubble is constantly in our face. You go through CNN, of course, and then Trump and everything else, but we're very rarely in their face. And the Democratic primary, this is what's so exciting about the Democratic primary, is we're having people in the Democratic primary now speaking out and saying, in fact, Trump, it is. Little Rose Garden thing just a few minutes ago said, we're not going to expand the Supreme Court. It's not ever going to happen. Why is he saying that? Because, a couple of the Democrats, I believe Elizabeth Warren and maybe Pete Buttigieg, have suggested that, it's time to pack the court. It's time to expand the Supreme Court. So, but David, to your point about violence, this concerns me tremendously. I mean, Steve King not only suggested that there would be a civil war, and that if there was a civil war, that the red states have 8 trillion more bullets than the blue states. But he also took a kick at trans people by saying, the blue states can't figure out which bathroom to use. It was homophobia on top of, every other kind of, phobia and hate that Steve King is so famous for promulgating. And if you look back at the Civil War that we had in the 1860s, or for that matter, the American Revolution. I mean, Jimmy Carter wrote a brilliant novel about this. Only about a third of Americans supported the American Revolution at the time that it began. And there were people fighting against their own families in the American Revolution, just like, in the Civil War. These are huge, painful, destructive moments for America. I don't think that they were any kind of purification. I mean, yes, out of them came, transformation. But David Swanson, in fact, in his book War is a Lie, makes a strong argument that war is the least effective way to bring about change. These calls for a civil war that I'm hearing from the right, and they're doing it with a lot of strutting and patting of their phallic symbols of their guns. I have a hard time taking it seriously. I get it that there are people like the shooter in New Zealand who took it totally seriously.
If I could tell you, Tom, some of the things that they said, the death threat guys.
Sure.
They are eagerly looking forward to this, and there's even a website, I didn't save it, called Thinning the Herd. Yeah. It's part of their national or international group, and by thinning the herd, they mean people of color, they mean excess people, because they really know that global warming is true, and they want to be the only survivors.
Yeah. It's a real tough one. It really is, David. And on the one hand, I'm very concerned about the stochastic terrorism that is being encouraged by Donald Trump. When he refuses to call out white nationalists, for example, he's encouraging more of them, and they become terrorists. And that's, it's what's been going on. It's been going on in a big way since the election of Obama, and it's been promoted by people like Donald Trump. But on the other hand, to freak out and say, oh my God, or we can't talk about this, or we have to, whatever, or we can't go there, I think is like to just hand it to them. They need to be dealt with like terrorists. I mean, the FBI needs to be on the case here. It's if we still believe, if as a country we believe in Gitmo, here's your place. David, thank you for the call. Actually, I wouldn't go to Gitmo.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Your thoughts? Are we on the verge of a civil war? Is Steve King right? Or, as usual, is he wrong and a fool? Our book today is How to Get Rid of a President by David Priess. And this is from the chapter Rejected by the Party, starting on page 12, kind of mid-chapter. Presidents need not be thrown out on the polls, at the polls on election day to find themselves dislodged from the White House. History shows us that a chief executive's own political allies can remove that incumbent when they perceive him as unpopular or unfit. Refusing to nominate a president for a second term, or better yet, getting the incumbent to realize that he should walk away before it becomes an embarrassing vote at the convention, does bring the party significant pain. But many politicians have calculated that discarding their own party's toxic president by internal action is better than waiting for the voters to do it. This dynamic remained absent for the first half century or so of American politics. George Washington, who didn't represent any formal party, set a precedent by stepping away from re-election after 2 terms. Successor after successor followed suit, keeping the support of their parties until they left office after 8 years. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and Jackson lost the next election, both Adamses and Van Buren, or met the Grim Reaper, Harrison. John Tyler, if only in this one respect, was a trendsetter. He began a 6-president cascade of men who failed to appear on their party's ballot in the general election after their first term. One, Zachary Taylor, literally had no choice. Like Harrison, he died in office. The others, by staying alive through their 4-year terms, could have carried their party's banners again on Election Day. Not one did, as national agonizing over slavery and other tensions within each of the major parties made it difficult for any president to build and sustain a governing coalition. Of those 5 chief executives, only James Polk left with a solid reputation and a ledger of successes. He'd told Democrats upon his nomination in 1844, "I shall enter upon the discharge of the high and solemn duties of the office with the settled purpose of not being a candidate for re-election." And he stayed true to his word. It was just as well. Only 3 months after what would have been his second inauguration, he died at the age of 53. The 3 presidents who followed Polk, the forgettable series of Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, and James Buchanan, shared 3 characteristics. First, historians routinely rank them among the nation's worst presidents. Second, and related to that, they took no responsibility for resolving the national moral failure of slavery. And third, no matter how they had attained office, they, like future presidents Chester Arthur and Lyndon Johnson, found themselves spurned by their own parties. The Whigs had learned in 1840 that a celebrity candidate seemed to have an easier route into the White House than a party regular. So in 1848, they nominated General Zachary Taylor, a recent hero of battlefields in the Mexican-American War. Despite his lack of solid political principles or any apparent passion for the job, just 2 years earlier he'd said with apparent sincerity, "I am not and never shall be an aspirant for that honor," Taylor won the election over Democratic candidate Lewis Cass. In July 1850, he became the second straight Whig general to president who couldn't make it to the next election alive. Vice President Millard Fillmore took his place. Fillmore had risen to prominence in New York's anti-Mason party dedicated to exposing and opposing Freemason fraternal organizations, but switched allegiance to the Whigs in the 1830s. In the first year and a half of the administration, inter-party rivals had manipulated Taylor better than Fillmore did, leaving him little to do but preside over the Senate and stew over his fate in a useless job. But as president, he was prepared to avenge perceived slights. Ahead of their expected dismissal, all the cabinet members whom Fillard had inherited from Taylor offered their resignations, which were quickly accepted by the new president. He asked them to remain in place for 1 month. They agreed to stay for 1 week. Fillmore would proceed to fire more previous political appointees than any of his successors had. More than half of those at the State Department, for example, had to find new jobs. The biggest development during Fillmore's presidency was the Compromise of 1850. This set of bills admitted California to the Union as a free state, allowed the organization of the Utah and New Mexico territories without reference to slavery, resolved both the Texas state boundary and the Lone Star State's remaining debt, abolished the slave trade in the District of Columbia, and reaffirmed the fugitive slave law that required the returning of slaves escaped across state lines. Fillmore signed each bill, believing this package of measures had fixed what he considered an annoying issue that kept getting in the way of his other priorities. The compromise bills delayed a war between the states, but at a cost. They not only perpetuated slavery, but split the Whigs further apart, as most Northerners refused to abide by the fugitive slave law. Congressional elections in November 1850 increased the Democratic opposition's majorities in both the House and the Senate. The rest of the president's term was so bad that the highlight might have been the start of Commodore Matthew Perry's voyage to Japan to open that country to American trade, even though he didn't arrive until Fillmore left office. Not long after rising to become the chief executive, Fillmore declared he wouldn't run again in the 1852 election. He reiterated that in 1851. But the trappings of presidential power and the pleas of his remaining party faithful convinced him to retract that pledge and make a late entry into the field of candidates. He portrayed his about-face as a noble personal sacrifice for the good of the party and the country. And during the spring of that election year, 8 Whig state conventions endorsed him. As delegates gathered for what a leading historian of the era calls the longest, most rancorous, and most debilitating Whig national convention ever to meet, the first tally had Fillmore in the lead. How to get rid of a president.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
"34 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Let's check out some geeky science here. Yes, it's our Geeky Science Alert. The researchers at Johns Hopkins University have been experimenting with a drug. It's called 5-methoxy-NN-dimethyltryptamine, or 5-MeO-DMT. If DMT sounds familiar, or dimethyltryptamine sounds familiar, it's a psychedelic that was, broadly used by teenagers like me back in the 60s, typically from plants. Ayahuasca is DMT. This is an herb. Actually, it's 2 different plants that are combined in the jungles of South and Central America and taken ceremonially by indigenous people there. Some of the other plants have DMT in it. The Bufo alvarius toad has DMT in it. And Terence McKenna wrote about this extensively before he died in several of his books about the use of DMT. And the experience lasts, it's very short acting, 30 to 90 minutes. And during that, and it's a full-blown psychedelic trip that only lasts, a half hour to an hour and a half. And the world just gets torn open. It's just like, rip, and all of a sudden you're popped into another world that's like, whoa, I didn't even realize there were other worlds beyond this world. And then, when you come back, it's like, and you come back to this world. It's just an amazing experience. I'm not encouraging you to do it. It is illegal, and it can be dangerous if it's done in the wrong set and setting. But what they found was that when it is done in a ceremonial group setting, and this was published last week in the American Journal of Drug and Alcohol Abuse, what they found is that given in a ceremonial setting, they are reporting improvements in self-reported depression and anxiety. They were not expecting that result. And they added improvements were also related to stronger beliefs that the experience contributed to enduring well-being and life satisfaction. There's, the use of psychedelics to treat alcoholism, to treat chronic depression, to treat some of these really intractable things that people struggle with throughout their lives is well documented. One of the first people to really do this research in a meaningful way, the 2 guys were Richard Alpert and Timothy Leary. Richard Alpert changed his name to Ram Dass, and he's still around. Tim Leary has passed away. I knew Tim Leary, and Tim Leary changed my life in many ways, and I'm really pleased to see this research. So anyhow, back to politics. Dave in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Hey, Dave, it says here you want to disagree with me about something. What's up?
Oh, yeah. Hey, I appreciate you taking my call. Thank you. I was calling in. I guess I'd maybe consider myself somewhat conservative, although I've voted for Mickey Mouse in the last 2 presidential elections. I do agree with you on a lot of points. Steve King's an idiot. Donald Trump is definitely a buffoon. He probably at least needs to lay off of Twitter. The Mark Levin show, I can't stand to listen to it. But where I was going to disagree with you on the global warming thing, I do agree in global warming as to how much we contribute to it. I definitely think that it's a factor. Where I think that the big disagreement between conservatives and and I guess progressives, you might say, is the Green New Deal is, at least from a pragmatic sense, pretty stupid. You know, and also disagree with the studies that say that there are 12 years left on Earth. I think that those studies have been blown way out of proportion.
Well, they don't say there's 12 years left on Earth. They say there's 12 years left before we put so much CO2 into the atmosphere that no matter what we do, we can't stop about a 6 or 8 degree increase in temperature, which will wipe out the ability of most humans to live on this planet.
Right. And
so you disagree with that science. I'm assuming that that's a faith-based disagreement, that you're not actually a scientist.
Well, I'm an engineer, but you know, you can take that for what it's worth.
Yeah.
But no, I disagree with how much that study's been blown out of proportion. But what I mainly called in to say was, let's assume that we take all the actions in this Green New Deal, which, you know, I don't think is possible. But let's say that it happened. The United States is not even the largest contributor to CO2 emissions. I guess, you know, my question is, what do you do about China?
China is building solar at a rate more than 400 times faster than any other country in the world right now. They're building out wind power. I forget the percentage for wind power, but it's massive. It's even higher than that. China is going green as fast as they can. China is subsidizing their electric car industry. There are places in China where it's no longer legal to even sell internal combustion engines. They've done the same thing that Norway has done. It's illegal now to sell. You cannot buy a gasoline or diesel-powered car in Norway anymore. It has to be an electric car, period. End of discussion. Parts of China have already done that, and the rest of China is soon behind. China is moving really, really fast to decarbonize. Now, that said, the reason why it's so important to look at the United States is we are 4.5% of the world's population. China's, you know, with over, what, 1.3 billion out of 7 billion. So that would make them, what, a little less than 20% of the world's, probably like 16% of the world's population. We're about equal in our carbon emissions right now, but as 4% of the world's population, we are responsible for 25% of the world's carbon dioxide since the Industrial Revolution. And therefore, any action we take in this country has a huge multiplier effect. You know, the individual people changing their lifestyle, not because it's imposed upon us. I mean, if the Green New Deal was, and first of all, the details of it still have to be worked out, right? It's just a statement of principles, Dave. But if, for example, we were going to do like Germany did and say, we're going to put solar panels on at least 1/3 of the houses in the country, and we're going to do it in a way that doesn't cost the homeowners a penny, and that doesn't cost the utilities a penny, that, you know, and that is going to, and Germany last summer, they had a couple of days there last summer where they produced more than 100% of the electricity that the country needed. They were exporting electricity to France. And because of this program that they put together, it was supposed to be originally a 10-year program. It was called the 100,000 Rooftops Program. I gave a speech like 15 years ago in Barcelona, Spain, with the German legislator who was the author of this. His name was Schmidt. And we keynoted a conference there in Barcelona. And the deal was they knew that they needed to build 2 new nuclear power plants in order to get enough electricity for the demand that they knew was coming in the next 2 decades. And there was this strong, and this was after Chernobyl, and there was this strong opposition in Germany to nuclear power. And so the program that Schmidt came up with is, he said, okay, what's it going to cost to build these 2 nuclear power plants? It's going to cost the equivalent of everybody, or about 1/3 of the people in Germany, spending roughly 7 times what they're spending on electricity for a 10-year period. In other words, we know what the costs are, right? Like the ones that they're building in North Carolina right now, they're like $13 billion. They're going to cost those ratepayers, you know, a couple $100 a month for the next 30 years. So we know what the costs are. So he said, okay, here's what it's going to cost to build these 2 nuclear power plants. And we know what it costs to put solar panels on a house. And so, you know, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the banks and say any homeowner who qualifies as a homeowner for an added mortgage, an additional mortgage, to say $10,000 for solar panels on their house, you're going to give them a loan, but it's only going to be at 2% because we're going to subsidize it. There's no possibility of losses. This is going to be pure profit for the banks. We as the government will backstop it. There's going to be a very low default rate anyway. You're talking about homeowners. Right. So people put the solar panels on their houses. It sparked a huge industry in Germany. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people got jobs putting these solar panels on. New factories are built making these solar panels, making the frames, transporting them around the country, number one. Number two, over the 10-year period that you have that mortgage, that second mortgage on your house, the electric company, which was going to build the nuclear power plant, has to buy electricity from you at 700% of retail. So if you're buying electricity right now at 10 cents a kilowatt hour, you're selling electricity to the power company at 70 cents a kilowatt hour. And what they calculated was that's enough that at the end of the year, you have made enough money selling solar power to the power company to pay for that year's mortgage on your solar panels. So it costs you nothing for the 10 years that you owe the money to the bank. And it costs the utility the exact same cost as building 2 nuclear power plants for the 10 years that they're having to pay you 7 times what the retail cost of electricity is. At the end of that period of time, nobody's paying anything, right? The power company goes back to buying electricity. You're paying 10 cents a kilowatt hour. You're selling it for 10 cents a kilowatt hour. The banks have been fully paid off. Everybody's good. And if you go to Germany, and as I do several times a year, and take the train like from Frankfurt to Steinach, you do 4 hours east to west across the country and look north, so you're looking at the southern slopes of the hills and things, at least a third of the houses are covered with solar panels. And it costs nobody anything. That's a Green New Deal, Dave. What's wrong with that?
Well, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but I will say...
this is not a tangent. I'm giving you a specific. And this is one of the things that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has cited. She said, Germany figured out how to do this. They had to, by the way, they had to stop the program 2 years ago. There was all this celebration. The Fox News, Germany's electric program is, they're putting it on hold. They had to stop it because the homes were generating so much electricity that the old power grid couldn't handle it. And they have to build out a whole new smart grid. But they've got plenty of money to do that with because they got free electricity from the sun.
All right. Well, right. I'll start from practically. I guess all I would say to that is I have done cost-benefit analysis for some clients on solar in some projects that we do, and at this point, at least in our area, I'm from Alabama, that it's not. Cost beneficial.
It's more than competitive, Dave.
In many applications, not possibly for home. But as far as nobody pays for it, you just said that the government would subsidize the loan,
right?
So we would all pay for it.
Well, if somebody defaults, yeah, but the actual cost at the end of 10 years was pretty much zero. It was negligible.
Okay, right. I guess what I'm saying is with the extremities in the Green New Deal, and I understand that it's just an overall plan. I think when we start citing the extremities, I think
for example, what do you think is extreme in there?
We're talking about rebuilding all the buildings over 10 years.
Well, not rebuilding. I mean, you're not going to tear them down and rebuild them. You're going to go in and insulate buildings that can be insulated. And all new buildings. In California right now, if you're going to build a new house, it has to have solar on its roof. It's a law.
And zero carbon emissions. I mean, we are a long way away from that.
I think we could do it in a decade if we threw into it what we threw into recovering from World War II and the Great Depression.
My car is a 2002, so if you think about in 10 years, so every car is not going to be operational.
You're absolutely right, Dave. In fact, the average replacement time is 17 years in the United States.
So practically, that's
average lifetime
in and of itself. I guess what I'm saying is when the average person, not even just the average conservative, but I think the Democratic Party is due for a split almost, because I think we're going to have Republicans, Democrats, and progressives, because of the extremities that are pointing out, even though it's just a plan, and I understand that, to the average person, it comes off as is ridiculous.
Well, and you make a good point there, Dave. I mean, you've got moderates in the Democratic Party. Beto O'Rourke, I guess, yesterday came out and said he wasn't in favor of the Green New Deal, and he's not in favor of Medicare for all. And then you've got other people like Kirsten Gillibrand, who used to be a conservative, in fact, used to be a Republican, is now embracing both. Right, so people are taking their positions in the Democratic Party, but at least in the Democratic Party, Dave, we're having a debate. In the Republican Party, You must bend down and kiss Donald Trump's ass, or you are toast. Just ask Lindsey Graham.
I can agree with that. Yeah, I can agree with that. You know, I've been frustrated. A lot of conservatives are slow to criticize Donald Trump, even on the ridiculous stuff. You know, like the North Korea. I mean, he got embarrassed, and then nobody wants to. He got owned about it. No, I agree that he's made mistakes. I'm not even talking about Donald Trump. I'm just saying that in the progressive party, I feel like they're moving so left, particularly on these environmental issues, that you might be due a split with.
I think that split is happening, but I think it's happening because you've got some Democrats who still want to be taking money from billionaires and from industry, and you've got other Democrats who are saying enough already. I mean, if you survey the American people, Dave, you're going to find more than 70–80% of the American people want a clean environment. They would love to get off fossil fuels. They would love to make sure this Medicare and Social Security is strong and solvent, and they don't care if you want to call it socialism. They want their schools to be well funded. These are not radical policies. These are the middle of America policies. And when progressives like Bernie and Elizabeth come out and say these things, and everybody goes, oh, you can't move too far to the left like they do on the morning on MSNBC. It's like, this is crazy. Dave, I got to run. Thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
48 minutes past the hour. Back with your calls in just a moment. Hey, stealing... Oh, that's afterwards. I'm sorry. Yeah. I got ahead of myself. Tina in Maryland watching Free Speech TV. Hey, Tina, what's on your mind?
Hey, I'm glad I found your show. My thing is I know that I have a lot of family that's Republican that didn't want to give up their vehicles. My vehicle's a 30-year-old. I'm 30-year-old vehicle because I'm low income. But hemp is one thing you didn't bring up. Hemp is where we started with vehicles.
You're right. We can make diesel fuel, and nowadays we can even make gasoline out of hemp. You're absolutely right. Or we can
now,
make
would it still be clean? Would it be clean, or would it be filthy?
Well, it depends because hemp is the plant that is the fastest converter of sunlight into cellulose of all the commercially viable crops that you can use to make fuels out of. So it is very efficient. Then the question is, are you harvesting that crop? Are you planting that crop with tractors and things that are powered by fossil fuel or powered by hemp oil, And I think if you can get into a thing where they're powered by hemp oil, you've got a virtuous cycle. You've got a system that's reinforcing itself. And, and with regard to low-income people making the transition into electric vehicles, that's one of the reasons why we have to have subsidies, and we have to, we have to make this work for everybody.
Yes. And there's one other thing, which I have a Republican family member who agrees with me with this. The plastic. You can't get away from it. When you go to the store, everything's in plastic. You get junk mail. All your mail, it has that thin plastic on it. So that's what I wanted to say, and I'm not going to keep you.
Okay, well, thank you, Tina. It's nice to hear from you, and you're absolutely right. That plastic is killing the planet, and we need to have a whole lot less packaging. I'm with you. Thank you for the call. Danny in Tell City, Indiana. Hey, Danny, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
I just wanted to say that I think two-thirds of the Republican Party is fascist, and Trump is a wannabe dictator, and he studied Hitler, read a book rather about Hitler, which I also did in high school about 52 years ago. But he, I just don't, Hitler, as his first rise to power, he failed and went to jail. And while he was in jail, he learned or had time to elaborate, and he figured out his mistakes and what worked, and also wrote a book, Mein Kampf. When he got out, and then he knew how to rise to power, which he did.
Right, which is My Struggle in English. Yeah. Mein Kampf means My Struggle, and that's the book that Hitler wrote. You're right. While he was in jail, him and Rudolf Hess. Yeah.
I never did know that. I always wondered. But anyway, I know while he was in power then, and as far as Mein Kampf, if you got purchased marriage license, you also had to buy his book. I guess if a baby was born, when you got the birth certificate, you had to buy his book. Anyway, he became a millionaire over that. Maybe even a death certificate when you got that. You had,
Yeah, it was pretty ubiquitous in Germany in the 30s.
Yeah, every time you turned around, you had to buy his book. So he became a millionaire, and well, history speaks for itself. From that point, he almost became ruler of the entire world if he had succeeded. But
yeah.
Due to the United States.
At least the European piece of it, yeah. No, you're absolutely right, Danny. And I think that I know that Vanna, Donald's first wife, said that he slept with a book of Hitler's speeches next to his bed. I don't know if he read them or not, but he's sure doing a good imitation. Danny, thank you for the call, and thanks for watching us there in Indiana. We'll be right back. Hey, over at ThomHartmann.com, we've got some really cool stuff. A lot of people don't realize that we produce a daily newsletter, and Sue puts we call it Sue's Daily Stack on there, which is literally a link to every story that I've talked about in the show. So all the research is right there. It's free. We don't share or sell our subscriber list. It's there's just it's there. It's there for you. And it's over at ThomHartmann.com. You can sign up for the free newsletter. You also can get my big picture take of the day, which is exclusively over at our website at ThomHartmann.com, as well as links to our videos, the book reports we typically do every day, all this stuff and more. It's all there at ThomHartmann.com. So check it out and sign up for our newsletter. I think you'll really enjoy it and appreciate it and find a lot of value there. We put a lot of work into this stuff. And you'll find it all right there on our website at ThomHartmann.com. And be sure to check out the newsletter and sign up for it. It's great.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. B in Raymond, New Hampshire. Hey, B, what's up?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for the common sense.
You're welcome.
You need some of these people you can't argue with because of ignorance.
I think that's true. I think there's an enormous amount of ignorance going around. And it doesn't mean they're stupid. It just means they're badly informed.
Well, like they say, with Republicans, ignorance is bliss.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, the reason I called was just a little tidbit that I heard from the Rachel Maddow show. About Trump, Humpy Dumpy, me and my friend call him. His father was arrested in the 1920s marching with the KKK.
That's right.
In New York.
That's right. Yep, and that and that doesn't get mentioned often enough. I mean, Donald Trump made a career about talking about the fact that Barack Obama's father was a black Muslim from Kenya. I mean, he literally, that's what he rode to the White House. And very rarely is it mentioned in the media. And like you said, B, I mean, it was a revelation for you. Very rarely is it mentioned that Donald Trump's father got arrested in a Klan rally in New York, in the Queens, as I recall. B, thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for pointing that out. Mark in Janesville, Wisconsin. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind?
Well, I'll give you the choice, Tom. The Steve King thing or the Green New Deal?
Up to you, Mark.
Well, we've talked about the guns before, and I'm a hunter, and all my hunting weapons are bolt actions. I think I said before, and you said, I hope you didn't want to go that way or believe that, and I don't either. The only reason I say the people having, the Democrats having some of these guns is like as an insurance policy. If it ever does go as crazy, I keep reading your book, The Crash 2016.
Yeah.
And if it ever does where there's no I mean, right now the Republicans want to go after Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. I mean, just they've gotten rid of outsourced all the jobs overseas, the Wall Street banksters. Yep. And if it ever does get to that point, are the Democrats, as nutty as these Republicans are the Democrats going to be, like sheep going to the slaughter?
Well, I hope not, Mark. And
I hope not either.
Yeah, and I'm not opposed to people arming themselves for self-defense. Where it gets squirrely is when people start building arsenals, basically. And it's only a small percentage of gun owners who have more than 1 or 2 guns, or more than 5 guns, I think is the threshold, where you kind of get into crazy land. But yeah, it's a tough one, and I just hope and pray. I mean, literally that we never reach that point in this country again. We've been there once in a big way with the Civil War, and arguably even with the Revolutionary War, where a lot of families were at war with each other over the Revolution. Thanks so much for being with us, and don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Get out there, get active, tag. You're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say